A reclusive artist in an empire of fading glory paints portraits that erase their subjects from existence. As his final commission nears, he must choose between creation, guilt, and the ghosts his art has claimed.
The evening air was cool and still as Wei Chen made his way through the narrow streets of the imperial city. The moon hung low, casting pale silver light over the ancient rooftops, and the faint murmur of distant footsteps echoed softly against the lacquered walls of the palace. It was late, past the hour when most courtiers had retired to their chambers, yet Wei Chen's heart was restless, stirred by the mysterious summons he had received just hours earlier. The summons itself was unlike any he had encountered in his years at court. A small, delicately folded parchment sealed with the crimson emblem of the imperial dragon, an insignia reserved for the most secretive and urgent matters, had arrived in the hands of a silent palace messenger. No explanation accompanied it, only a directive to come immediately to the palace's hidden mural chambers. The weight of the seal pressed heavily on Wei Chen's thoughts as he approached the palace gates, their ornate carvings dimly illuminated by flickering lanterns. Inside, the palace breathed a different life at night. The usual bustle of advisors, guards, and servants was replaced by a hushed stillness, broken only by the soft padding of footsteps on polished stone. Wei Chen's senses heightened, the scent of aged wood mingled with the faint trace of incense, the distant swirl of silk robes brushing against marble pillars. Guided by a palace attendant whose face was obscured in shadow, Wei Chen traversed long corridors lined with ancient tapestries depicting battles and ceremonies of centuries past. At last, they arrived before a heavy wooden door, its surface carved with intricate dragons and phoenixes locked in eternal dance. The attendant paused, bowed deeply, and then pushed open the door to reveal a chamber unlike any Wei Chen had seen before. The walls were covered in faded murals, the colors dulled with time, but still telling stories of dynasties long vanished. Scenes of emperors in radiant glory, of courtiers whispering secrets, of battles won and lost, all frozen in paint and silence. It was here that Wei Chen was to meet the emperor himself. The chamber was dimly lit by hanging lanterns, whose warm glow cast trembling shadows across the murals. At the far end stood Emperor Zhu Yujian, regal and imposing in his imperial robes embroidered with golden threads that caught the light like rivers of flame. His gaze was steady, inscrutable, as he regarded the painter with a mixture of command and something softer, almost wary. "Wei Chen," the emperor began, his voice low but clear, "the time has come for a task unlike any before. Your skill is known throughout the empire, your brush a vessel for truth and beauty. Yet what I ask of you is a paradox, to immortalize my reign and grandeur while erasing the man behind the throne." Wei Chen's breath caught. The paradox was as sharp as a blade. To paint a portrait that would preserve the emperor's image for eternity, yet obliterate the emperor's true self from memory and history, it was a command heavy with unspoken consequences. "Why such a decree, your majesty?" Wei Chen asked cautiously, his voice betraying a flicker of doubt. The emperor's eyes darkened, reflecting the flickering lantern light. "Our dynasty is crumbling, torn by rebellion and decay. Yet the image of strength must endure beyond the frailty of flesh and time. Through your art, I shall live in the minds of my people as the eternal sovereign, unblemished by mortal flaws." Silence settled over the chamber like a thick fog. Wei Chen felt the weight of the task pressing down on his shoulders, the conflict between duty and conscience stirring within him. Could he create a likeness that both celebrated and concealed? Could his brush dance between illusion and truth without losing himself? Madame Lion, the palace advisor and keeper of the forbidden murals, stepped forward. Her silver-streaked hair shimmered in the lantern light, and her dark eyes held secrets as old as the dynasty itself. "Wei Chen," she intoned softly, "these murals you see a testament to the power and peril of memory. The past is a fragile thing, easily rewritten or forgotten. Your work will be the next chapter in that story. Choose your strokes wisely. The painter nodded, his thoughts swirling like ink in water. As he gazed upon the faded murals, he felt the echo of vanished emperors, whispering through the ages, a haunting reminder of the impermanence of power, the cost of silence, and the burden of legacy. That night, as Wei Chen retreated to his chambers, the emperor's decree echoed in his mind. The summons to the forbidden chambers was not merely a call to paint. It was an invitation to traverse the delicate boundary between memory and oblivion. And with every brushstroke to come, Wei Chen would be forced to confront the fragile nature of existence itself. Outside, the moon continued its slow journey across the sky, indifferent to the mortal struggles unfolding beneath its light. Within the walls of the palace, a painter prepared to wield his brush not just as an artist, but as a keeper of secrets and a shaper of history's fading shadows. The journey had begun, and with it, the haunting dance between creation and inertia. The morning light filtered through the narrow lattice windows of the palace's painting chamber, casting a muted glow on Wei Chen's slender frame as he settled before the expanse of fine rice paper laid on the polished wooden table. The air was thick with the scent of ink and crushed pigments, a familiar comfort mingled now with an undercurrent of unease. Minister Zhao stood silently near the entrance, his dark robes a stark contrast to the delicate surroundings, eyes sharp and unyielding as they bore down on Wei Chen's every movement. Wei Chen dipped his brush carefully into the inkstone, the cool liquid pooling at its tip like a droplet of night. His hand trembled ever so slightly, not from lack of skill, but from the weight of the task before him. To paint the emperor was an honor beyond measure, yet the decree he had been given twisted this honor into a bitter paradox. To immortalize a sovereign by erasing the man himself. His brush hovered, then began its dance, strokes flowing with practiced grace. The emperor's visage emerged regal, poised, a symbol of eternal authority. Yet beneath the surface, Wei Chen's conscience stirred. The portraits demanded perfection, an idealized image that concealed the frailty and fear that lurked behind the imperial mask. As the lines took form, a subtle shift began to creep into Wei Chen's work. The edges of the emperor's robes blurred, dissolving into wisps of mist that seemed to pull away from the figure like fading echoes. Eyes that once commanded now flickered with shadows, hinting at the loneliness behind the throne. The brush traced faint, almost imperceptible veins of imperfection, tiny fractures in the jade façade. Minister Zhao's gaze never wavered, yet Wei Chen felt its weight heavier with each surreal detail that slipped into his sketches. The chamber's silence was punctuated only by the scratching of brush on paper and Wei Chen's measured breathing. His heart wrestled between the loyalty ingrained in his blood and the rebellious whispers of his soul. At the threshold, a small figure appeared, Jin Hua, the apprentice whose youthful eyes gleamed with unspoken questions. He approached quietly, his ink-stained fingers trembling with excitement and apprehension. Wei Chen glanced up, offering a brief, wary smile. "Master," Jin Hua whispered, "why does the emperor's face seem to dissolve in your sketches?" Wei Chen's eyes met the boy's, and for a moment the heavy mask of duty slipped. "Because," he said softly, "sometimes what we see is not what must be remembered." Jin Hua's gaze sharpened with a mixture of confusion and dawning understanding. He returned to the shadows, leaving Wei Chen alone once more with his conflicted brush. Hours passed, and the chamber grew dim, shadows lengthening like the fading days of the dynasty itself. Wei Chen leaned back, eyes scanning the pages littered with images both majestic and haunting. The surreal motifs whispered secrets of impermanence, of loss, of a truth too dangerous to declare aloud. The artist's soul ached with the knowledge that each stroke was both creation and erasure, a silent rebellion waged in ink and color. The emperor's immortal image would endure, but the man beneath would vanish, swallowed by the artistry meant to preserve him. Wei Chen closed his eyes, the echo of the brush's glide lingering in his mind. Duty demanded obedience, but his heart beat with the quiet defiance of those surreal lines, fragile yet resolute. like the fragile flame of memory flickering against the dark tide of oblivion. Outside, the palace hummed with whispers and watchful eyes. Within the chamber, a painter wrestled with the ghosts of history, wielding brushes that could both save and destroy. As the day ended, Wei Chen's hand rested beside the inkstone, the final sketch, before him a testament to his inner turmoil, a portrait both reverent and rebellious, a silent scream in the court of vanishing emperors. And yet the question lingered, sharp and unresolved. How long could a man paint shadows before becoming one himself? The chamber doors closed softly behind Minister Zio's departing steps, and Jin Ho's footsteps faded into the distant corridors. Wei Chen's gaze returned to the paper, the surreal edges of the emperor's face shimmering like a mirage, beautiful, haunting, and impossibly fragile. The early morning light filtered through the carved wooden lattices of the palace corridors, casting fragmented patterns across the polished stone floor. Wei Chen sat quietly in his painting chamber, the scent of ink and drying pigments filling the air. His brush hovered over the delicate silk stretched taut on the frame. The emperor's visage was beginning to take shape, a regal countenance, calm and composed, yet Wei Chen's eyes sought something beyond the surface, something the court demanded he omit. As his brush moved with practiced grace, faint voices drifted through the open window, carried on a breeze that stirred the silken curtains. At first, it was nothing more than murmurs, but as Wei Chen paused, he caught fragments of words, whispers of rebellion, of forbidden love, of a palace simmering with secrets. His heart tightened. The emperor's carefully crafted image was not the entire truth. Beneath the gilded surface, the empire trembled. Jin Ho, his young apprentice, stood nearby, sketching fervently on a scrap of parchment. The boy's eyes sparkled with a mixture of awe and defiance as he glanced up at Wei Chen. "Master," Jin Ho whispered, "I drew something new, see." He unfolded the paper to reveal a symbol hidden within a floral motif, a subtle mockery of imperial authority. Wei Chen's gaze lingered on the ink-stained fingers of his apprentice, a stark contrast to the careful restraint demanded by the court. Outside the chamber, the heavy footsteps of Minister Zhao echoed sharply against the cold stone. The political enforcer's presence was a constant reminder of the peril that shadowed every act of creation within the palace walls. Wei Chen felt the weight of Zhao's scrutiny, even without his gaze upon him. The minister's role was clear: ensure all obeyed the emperor's will, and punish defiance without mercy. That night, Wei Chen wandered the palace corridors, the whispers now louder in his mind. He paused outside a pair of concealed chambers where soft laughter and stolen words hinted at a clandestine romance. Madame Lion's voice, low and measured, interwove with the younger woman's, their conversation a delicate dance of loyalty and longing. The painter's soul ached with the knowledge that these human stories would be lost beneath the grand narrative he was commanded to paint. Back in his chamber, Wei Chen resumed his work, his brush strokes trembling with the burden of unspoken truths. Each line he drew was a negotiation between duty and conscience, memory and oblivion. The emperor's portrait grew not only as a symbol of power, but as a canvas of contradictions, strength veiled by fear, immortality shadowed by impending ruin. Jin Ho's youthful defiance inspired Wei Chen to explore subtle illusions within his art, embedding hidden symbols that spoke of resistance and hope. Yet, the painter remained haunted by the knowledge that every stroke erased fragments of the emperor's humanity, and, with it, parts of his own soul. The chamber was cloaked in shadows, the faint scent of incense curling through the air as Wei Chen entered with measured steps. The walls, draped in ancient silk tapestries faded by time, seemed to hold their breath in reverence. At the room's center stood Madame Lion, her silver-streaked hair a striking contrast against the dim glow of the flickering candles. Her dark eyes caught the light, sharp and penetrating, as she regarded the young painter with a knowing calm. "Wei Chen," she began, her voice a quiet thread weaving through the stillness, "you have been entrusted with a burden heavier than brush and pigment. The portraits you are to create will shape the memory of this dynasty, but at a cost that few dare to speak aloud. Wei Chen's gaze faltered, the weight of her words settling deep within him. Madam Lion, I have been summoned to immortalize the emperor, yet I fear these images demand the erasure of his true self. How can art serve both preservation and oblivion? A faint smile touched her lips, enigmatic and somber. The murals you see, hidden away from common eyes, hold the echoes of emperors long gone. They speak not only of glory but of silence and loss. Each stroke conceals as much as it reveals. She gestured toward a distant wall, where faint outlines of faded murals whispered of forgotten histories. Approaching the wall, Wei Chen's fingers hovered just above the textured surface, tracing the ghostly shapes concealed beneath layers of dust and neglect. These stories, they are alive yet silent, he murmured, a mixture of awe and sorrow coloring his voice. Madame Lian nodded. They embody the fragile dance between memory and forgetting. Our dynasty's dignity hinges on the delicate balance of what is shown and what remains hidden. You must understand that your art is not merely creation, it is a form of preservation and a tool of erasure. The room seemed to pulse with the weight of unspoken truths. Wei Chen's thoughts swirled like ink in water, the lines between loyalty and conscience blurring. How does one honor the past when the past demands silence? By recognizing that every image wields power, Madame Lion replied softly. The emperor seeks to be immortal, yet immortality demands sacrifice. You, Wei Chen, stand at the crossroads of this sacrifice. What you choose to reveal or conceal will ripple through time. A sudden breeze stirred, carrying with it the flutter of paper scrolls on Wei Chen's desk. Their movement was erratic, mirroring the uncertainty tightening around his heart. The ancient chamber, once a sanctuary of secrets, now felt like a crucible forging his resolve. You must tread carefully, Madame Lion cautioned, her gaze steady. The palace is a realm of shadows, where truth is often a luxury. But remember, not all silence is consent, and not all obedience is surrender. Wei Chen swallowed hard, the gravity of her counsel settling like ink staining the fabric of his soul. I will carry this burden, Madame Lion, but I fear the path ahead is fraught with peril. She stepped closer, her voice a whisper meant only for him. Then paint not just with your hands, but with your heart. Let your brush speak the silent stories that words cannot. As Madame Lion turned away, her robes sweeping the floor with quiet grace, Wei Chen felt a flicker of something new, a silent rebellion awakening within him. The chamber's shadows seemed less oppressive now, as if illuminated by the faint glow of hope. Alone amid the ancient walls, Wei Chen contemplated the fragile legacy entrusted to him. The mural's hidden tales and Madame Lion's cryptic guidance had unsettled his certainty, yet gifted him a deeper understanding of the power he wielded. His art was no longer a mere reflection of imperial command. It was a battleground of memory and erasure, truth and illusion. Outside, the palace breathed with the weight of secrets and the murmurs of a fading dynasty. Inside, Wei Chen's brush trembled with purpose, poised to carve a path through the delicate interplay of history and silence. The journey ahead would demand courage beyond the stroke of paint. It would demand the courage to see beyond the emperor's visage and into the soul that sought to vanish. In that moment, the painter embraced the paradox of his calling. To immortalize was to erase, to preserve was to betray. Yet within this contradiction lay the fragile hope that art could transcend the silence, whispering truths through the ages even when voices were stilled. And so, with the weight of centuries pressing upon him, Wei Chen prepared to paint not just a portrait, but a legacy, one that would haunt the palace halls long after the emperors had vanished into the mists of time. The candlelight flickered once more, casting dancing shadows that blurred the line between memory and oblivion. The forbidden murals awaited, and with them the secrets of a dynasty's soul. Wei Chen's silent rebellion had begun. The morning light filtered softly through the paper windows of the painter's quarters, casting a gentle glow on the rows of delicate brushes and the neat stacks of rice paper. Wei Chen sat quietly at his worktable, his slender fingers tracing the faint outlines of an unfinished portrait. The air was thick with the scent of ink and turpentine, mingling with the faint aroma of jasmine tea cooling in a porcelain cup. A hesitant knock interrupted the stillness. Wei Chen looked up to see a young boy standing in the doorway. His eyes sparkled with a mix of nervousness and excitement, and his slender frame was dusted with the remnants of charcoal and ink stains. This was Jin Hoa, the court's newest apprentice, summoned to learn the ancient and secretive art that Wei Chen had mastered over years of dedication. "Master Wei," Jin Hoa began, bowing deeply, "I am honored to begin my studies under your guidance." Wei Chen nodded, the weight of responsibility settling upon him. "Come in, Jin Hoa. The path ahead is arduous, but the brush is a powerful tool, one that can both preserve and destroy." In the days that followed, Jin Hoa immersed himself in the rhythms of the studio. His youthful enthusiasm was infectious, but his inexperience was evident. Wei Chen watched as the boy struggled to steady his hand, to control the flow of ink, to capture the subtle shifts of light and shadow. One evening, as the lanterns flickered and cast dancing shadows on the walls, Jin Ho's frustration spilled over. "Why must we paint only what the emperor commands?" he asked, voice tinged with rebellion. "Is there no place for truth in our art?" Wei Chen's gaze darkened, the question stirring a tempest within him. "Art serves the empire, Jin Hoa. It immortalizes power and preserves order. Truth is a luxury we cannot afford." But Jin Hoa's eyes shone with defiance. "Perhaps it is our duty to show the world what lies beneath the surface, to capture what others fear to see." The tension between master and apprentice grew, a fragile thread weaving doubt and hope. Jin Hoa's sketches began to stray from the traditional, his brush strokes bold and unrestrained. He painted figures cloaked in shadow, faces etched with sorrow and strength, symbols that whispered of rebellion and resistance. Wei Chen found himself drawn to these images, their raw honesty piercing the veil of illusion he had long maintained. Yet the shadow of the court's watchful eyes loomed ever near, a reminder of the peril that accompanied such defiance. One night, Wei Chen stood before his easel, brush poised over the canvas. The faces of emperors past seemed to flicker in the candlelight, their silent gazes urging him onward. Beside him, Jin Hoa sketched furiously, his hand guided by a fire that refused to be quenched. Together, Jin Hoa whispered, "We can paint a future where truth lives, even if it must be hidden." Wei Chen hesitated, then nodded. The apprentice's spark had ignited a flame within him, a fragile hope amidst the encroaching darkness of Erisha. As the palace slept, two artists worked in secret, their brush strokes a silent rebellion against the fading of memory and the tyranny of oblivion. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Wei Chen glimpsed a path that might preserve not only the emperor's legacy, but the soul of the man behind the throne, and perhaps his own. The night deepened, and the shadows lengthened, yet within the quiet studio, a new light flickered, a fragile, defiant promise born of paint and hope. And so, the apprentice's spark illuminated the painter's soul, setting in motion the delicate dance of art, memory, and resistance that would shape the fate of an empire. The first strokes of this new chapter had been laid, but the canvas of destiny awaited the unfolding tale. Wei Chen knew the choices ahead would test not only his skill, but the very essence of his being. The question remained, could the brush wielded in silence speak loudly enough to change the course of history? His hand trembled slightly as he dipped the brush once more into the ink, the dance between duty and truth just beginning. The palace studio stood shrouded in a muted hush, the only sound the gentle scratch of Wei Chen's brush gliding across the smooth silk canvas. The air was cool, scented faintly with the sharp tang of ink, and the dry mustiness of old parchment stacked in neat piles nearby. Outside, the distant clamor of the palace faded into an almost imperceptible background, as if the world beyond these stone walls had ceased to exist. Here, in this secret chamber bathed in pale morning light filtering through lattice windows, Wei Chen toiled with a restless spirit. His slender fingers, calloused from years of practice, moved with deliberate care, layering shadow upon light, stroke upon stroke, weaving an intricate tapestry where reality blurred with illusion. The subject of his latest work was Emperor Zhu Yujian, the last sovereign of a crumbling dynasty, yet the portrait was unlike any Wei Chen had painted before. It was no mere likeness. It was a silent narrative, a subtle rebellion encoded within pigments and brushwork. The emperor's robes shimmered with faint, almost imperceptible patterns, delicate serpentine dragons curling into the folds, their eyes gleaming with a secret fire. Behind the imperial gaze, Wei Chen had hidden shadowy figures, whispering ghosts that seemed to breathe beneath the surface. These were the unspoken truths, the vulnerabilities the emperor sought to erase from history. Jin Hua, his apprentice, stood nearby, eyes bright with youthful curiosity. The boy's fingers were stained ink black, evidence of his eager attempts to mimic his master's technique. Master, Jin Ho whispered, leaning forward to peer closer at the canvas, "Why do the dragons seem to move when I shift my view?" Wei Chen smiled faintly, a rare softness in his otherwise solemn demeanor. "It is the nature of truth, Jin Ha," he replied quietly. "It changes with perspective. What one sees depends on where one stands." The apprentice's gaze lingered on the hidden symbols, his mind alight with questions unspoken. Jin Hao's youthful idealism was a stark contrast to the heavy weight pressing on Wei Chen's heart. The boy represented a new generation, one unburdened by the shackles of imperial decree, yet caught within the same suffocating walls. Outside the studio door, the unmistakable footfalls of Minister Zhao approached, heavy, measured, and ominous. Wei Chen felt a familiar tightening in his chest. The minister was the embodiment of the emperor's iron will, enforcing decrees with ruthless efficiency. His presence was a constant reminder of the thin line Wei Chen walked between obedience and defiance. Wei Chen lowered his brush, the momentary pause filled with unspoken tension. He knew that each hidden symbol, each illusion embedded beneath the surface was a risk. Discovery would mean ruin, not just for him, but for all who dared to glimpse the forbidden truths. Yet the act of embedding these secret messages was a balm to his conscience, a way to preserve the emperor's humanity, even as the official portraits sought to erase it. As Minister Xiao's footsteps receded down the corridor, Wei Chen exhaled slowly, his thoughts swirling like ink dropped into water, dark, spreading, impossible to contain. He returned to the canvas, his brush now more deliberate, each stroke a silent act of courage. The emperor's gaze in the portrait seemed to flicker with life, a fragile echo of a man trapped between power and mortality. Jin Hoa watched, inspired by his master's subtle rebellion. One day the boy said softly, "I will paint the truth without fear." Wei Chen's eyes met Jin Hoa's, a flicker of hope kindling amidst the shadows. "Perhaps," he murmured, "but for now, our truth must remain hidden beneath the ink." The afternoon waned, and the studio grew dimmer, but Wei Chen's hand did not falter. The secrets under ink multiplied, each brushstroke a testament to the fragile dance between memory and oblivion. The portraits were no longer mere images, they had become whispered stories, veiled in mystery and defiance, reflecting not only the emperor's duality, but Wei Chen's own internal struggle. As twilight settled over the palace, Wei Chen set down his brush and stepped back to survey his work. The painting held its secrets well, an intricate web of light and shadow, truth and illusion, bound forever in colors that would outlast the fleeting years. Yet beneath the surface, he felt the growing weight of his concealed rebellion. How long could he continue this dangerous game before the shadows consumed him? The grand audience hall was vast, bathed in the soft glow of lanterns, whose light flickered gently against the walls adorned with tapestries that whispered stories of dynasties past. Wei Chen's footsteps echoed faintly on the polished stone floor as he was led through the heavy silk curtains that marked the entrance to the imperial presence. His breath caught in his throat, heart hammering beneath the modest scholar's robes that clung lightly to his slender frame. The air was thick with the scent of sandalwood incense, curling upward in ghostly spirals, filling the chamber with a solemnity that seemed to press upon his very soul. At the center of the hall, upon a dais carved from jade and gold, sat Emperor Zhu Yujian. The monarch's imperial robes shimmered with intricate embroidery of dragons and phoenixes, the silk catching the lantern light like liquid fire. His posture was regal, commanding, yet Wei Chen's eyes, trained through years of observing the subtleties of human nature, caught the faint tremor of exhaustion beneath the surface. The emperor's gaze was inscrutable, dark pools that seemed to hold weighty secrets, and the burden of an empire teetering on the edge of collapse. Wei Chen bowed deeply, the tradition binding him in this moment as much as the weight of his new commission. The painter's mind raced, caught between awe for the man before him and the heavy knowledge of the task entrusted to his brush to capture a visage that was eternal yet stripped of its flawed humanity. Madame Lion, standing silently nearby with her silver-streaked hair framing a face carved by wisdom and hardship, leaned toward Wei Chen in a hushed tone. "Remember, young painter," she whispered, "the emperor wears a crown heavier than gold. Beneath the silk and jewels lies a man, fragile as the parchment you paint upon." Wei Chen's eyes flicked to the emperor again, noting the slight furrow between his brows, the tightness of his lips, and the restless glint that betrayed sleepless nights filled with anxiety and doubt. This was no immortal sovereign. This was a man caught in the relentless tide of history, desperate to secure a legacy even as his world crumbled. Minister Xiao stood rigidly to one side, his presence a stark contrast, a living embodiment of the court's iron will and unforgiving order. His sharp eyes never left Wei Chen, a silent reminder of the peril that accompanied any hint of defiance or hesitation. The audience was brief. Wordless commands and subtle gestures conveyed more than words ever could. As Wei Chen withdrew, he felt the weight of the emperor's gaze linger, a silent plea and a challenge intertwined. Alone in his chamber, the painter dipped his brush into ink, the familiar scratch of bristles against rice paper grounding him amidst the whirl of thoughts. He sketched feverishly, capturing the emperor's haunted eyes, the fragile curve of a brow, the tension in a jaw that spoke of unspoken fears. Each stroke was a testament not only to the man's outward majesty, but also to the vulnerability beneath a truth Wei Chen was forbidden to reveal. The palace around him hummed with whispered intrigues and hidden dangers, but in this quiet moment, Wei Chen confronted the most perilous secret of all: the humanity of the emperor, which he was commanded to erase. As night deepened, so too did Wei Chen's turmoil. The painter knew that the portraits he created would shape the future and memory, but at what cost? With every brushstroke, he was not merely immortalizing a ruler, he was erasing a person, obliterating the fragile humanity that made the emperor real. The palace corridors seemed to grow narrower with each step Wei Chen took, the once familiar walls transformed into looming barriers of stone and silence. The faint scent of incense mingled with the cold draft creeping under the heavy doors, carrying whispers of secrets and warnings that weighed on his shoulders like an iron yoke. As he approached the appointed chamber, a figure detached itself from the shadows: Minister Zhao, the emperor's unyielding enforcer. His dark robes rustled softly, embroidered insignia glinting faintly in the muted light, his eyes sharp as a hawk's and just as unrelenting. "Painter Wei," Xiao's voice cut through the stillness, low and edged with controlled menace. "The emperor's orders are not mere suggestions. They are the law that governs your brush, your canvas, and your very existence within these walls." Wei Chen bowed his head, the weight of the words settling deep in his chest. He felt the keen edge of Zhao's gaze, as if it sought to pierce the very soul beneath his scholarly robes. "I understand, Minister Zhao. I am committed to my duty. Understanding is not enough," Zhao replied, stepping closer until the distance between them was charged with silent threat. "There will be no room for hesitation or defiance. The portraits you create will shape history. They will immortalize the emperor's reign, not his flaws. Should you stray, the consequences will be dire. The painter's throat tightened. In the stillness, his mind raced not with fear alone, but with the heavy burden of the paradox he had been entrusted to embody, to immortalize and yet to erase, to honor and to obliterate. Zhou's shadow loomed not just over the corridors, but across the very essence of Wei Chen's art. Later, alone before his easel, the flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the delicate silk stretched taut in the frame. Wei Chen's brush hovered uncertainly, the pigments seeming to blur beneath his fingers as doubt gnawed at his resolve. Each stroke carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths, yet each truth threatened to unravel the fragile illusion the emperor demanded. Outside, the muffled footsteps of palace guards echoed sharply as Minister Zhou patrolled the grounds, his presence a constant reminder of the court's suffocating control. Wei Chen caught a glimpse of him through the latticed window, rigid, vigilant, a sentinel of repression enforcing the silence that swallowed dissent like a creeping fog. Despite the fear curling in his chest, a flicker of defiance kindled within the painter's heart. He dipped his brush anew, this time with a steadier hand, blending shadows and light in a dance as elusive as the emperor's own concealed fears. The image began to take shape not the flawless visage demanded, but one tinged with subtle hints, whispers of vulnerability woven beneath the imperial guise. Yet with every line drawn, the risk grew. The shadow of Minister Zhou stretched long and cold, a reminder that art here was not merely creation but survival. The heavy wooden door groaned softly as Madame Lion pushed it open, revealing the hidden chamber beyond. A faint scent of aged lacquer and dust hung in the air, mingling with the cold stillness that enveloped the room. Wei Chen stepped inside cautiously, his eyes adjusting to the dim glow cast by a few scattered candles that flickered against the stone walls. Here, untouched by time's usual ravages in the bustling heart of the palace, stretched a series of murals, vast tapestries of painted history that whispered secrets from centuries past. The murals, though faded and cracked, shimmered with an eerie vitality. Figures of emperors long erased from official records stood frozen in moments of triumph and despair, their faces rendered with a breathtaking intimacy that seemed to defy the years. Wei Chen's gaze was drawn to one particular image, a regal man seated beneath a blossoming plum tree, his eyes heavy with sorrow and resolve. Time had worn the colors to muted earth tones, yet the sorrow in the emperor's eyes was palpable, transcending the centuries. Madame Lion's voice broke the silence, soft yet resolute. These murals are the true chronicles of our dynasty, hidden away because they tell stories that the court deems inconvenient. They reveal the emperors as men flawed, mortal, vulnerable. The official histories erase these truths, painting only immortal ideals. Wei Chen's fingers hovered above the mural, hesitating before brushing against the cracked surface. The texture was rough beneath his touch, the paint brittle yet stubbornly clinging to the plaster. It was as though the wall itself breathed the memories of those long gone, their legacies suspended between preservation and oblivion. Why hide them? Wei Chen asked, his voice barely a whisper. Madame Lion's eyes met his, dark and piercing. Because truth is dangerous, it threatens the illusion of eternal rule. The court fears that if the people see their emperors as mere men, the fragile order will crumble. These murals are forbidden, a secret kept to protect a fading dynasty. As Wei Chen moved through the chamber, the quiet weight of the hidden histories pressed upon him. Each mural was a testament to lives lived and lost, to dreams shattered beneath the weight of power and expectation. The knowledge unsettled him deeply. Here were the stories that his own work was meant to overwrite the faces he was commissioned to immortalize in perfection while erasing their flawed humanity. Madame Lion's presence beside him was steady, a reminder of the delicate balance between duty and truth that governed the palace. Your task is not unlike those who painted these walls, she said. To create, to preserve, but also to conceal. You must decide what legacy you will leave. The candle flames flickered, casting shifting shadows across the murals, as if the past itself was restless, yearning to be seen and remembered. Wei Chen felt the weight of this revelation settle heavily on his shoulders. The emperor's decree was no longer a mere artistic challenge. It was a command to participate in the erasure of history, to silence the very humanity that these walls had so courageously preserved. In that dim chamber, surrounded by the silent testimonies of forgotten emperors, Wei Chen's resolve wavered. The boundaries between art and memory blurred, and the painter found himself standing at a crossroads where every brushstroke would carry the burden of truth or deception. As he turned to Madame Lion, the question burned quietly between them: could art be both a weapon of erasure and a beacon of remembrance? And at what cost would such a duality come? The chamber's heavy door remained open behind them, a threshold between the forbidden past and the uncertain future. Wei Chen knew that once he stepped back into the bright halls of the palace, nothing would remain the same. The hidden murals had shattered his illusions, and with them, the fragile balance of his loyalty and conscience. Yet, the path forward was still shrouded in shadow, as elusive and delicate as the faded pigments beneath his fingertips. He lingered a moment longer, eyes tracing the silent faces on the walls, ghosts of emperors who had vanished from memory but lived on in their painted remnants. The painter's heart tightened with a melancholy that mingled reverence and despair. He would carry their stories within him, a secret weight that no decree could erase. And as the candlelight flickered once more, casting long shadows that danced like vanished souls, Wei Chen understood that his own art would become part of this fragile legacy, a haunting dance between memory and oblivion. The painter's chamber was cloaked in the muted hues of dusk, shadows pooling around the edges of the room as Wei Chen sat by his work table, a scroll unfurled before him. The faint scent of ink mingled with the lingering fragrance of sandalwood incense, a reminder of the palace's delicate balance between tradition and unrest. Across from him, Jin Ho's slender fingers, streaked with black ink, moved with a reckless confidence, painting symbols and figures that defied the rigid lines demanded by imperial decree. "Master Wei," Jin Ho said quietly, his voice carrying the tremor of both excitement and defiance, "why must we confine ourselves to the emperor's image alone? What of the people, their stories, their struggles?" Wei Chen's eyes lingered on the young apprentice's work, a swirling composition, where dragons morphed into clouds and faces emerged from the mist, half hidden, half revealed. The brush strokes were bold, almost rebellious. "The emperor's portrait is our duty," Wei Chen replied carefully, his voice low, "but I see what you mean. There is a world beyond these walls, filled with truths our paintings dare not speak." Jin Ho's gaze met Wei Chen's, bright with fervor. "Art should be freedom, not chains. If we only paint what we retold, then what is the worth of our craft?" A silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the palace guard's footsteps, the faint murmur of voices behind closed doors. Wei Chen felt the weight of his own suppressed doubts pressing against the walls of his conscience. Days passed, and Jin Ho's restless spirit only grew more apparent. He lingered longer over his sketches, infusing them with subtle symbols of resistance, a broken seal here, a shadowed figure there. Wei Chen found himself drawn to these hidden messages, yet also fearful of the consequences. Minister Zio's watchful eyes were everywhere. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shafts of light through the lattice windows, Minister Zio entered the chamber without announcement. His presence was a cold gust, silencing the room instantly. "Jin Hoa," Zio's voice was sharp, "your recent work borders on insubordination. The emperor's image must remain unblemished." Jin Hoa straightened, meeting the minister's gaze squarely. "My brush seeks only to reveal what lies beneath the surface, not to defy the throne." Minister Zio's lips tightened into a thin line. "Beware the path you tread. The palace does not tolerate rebellion, even in art." As Zhou departed, the room seemed to exhale a held breath. Wei Chen's heart pounded not just from fear, but from a growing recognition that Jinhoa's courage stirred something long dormant within him. That night, under the flickering light of a lantern, Wei Chen stared at his own ink-stained hands. Each smudge was a reminder of his skill and his chains. Memories of his childhood in the provincial town washed over him, days spent watching his father paint. Tales of honor and legacy whispered in the family's modest home. How had his own brush become a tool of erasure rather than creation? The next morning, in the palace garden, where plum blossoms drifted like pale snow, Jinhoa approached Wei Chen. The air was cool, carrying the scent of earth and renewal. "Master," Jinho said softly, "there is still time to paint the truth, even if only in whispers. Together, we can weave memory into illusion, hope into silence." Wei Chen looked up at the fragile blossoms, their petals trembling in the breeze. A faint smile touched his lips, the first in many months. "Perhaps," he murmured, "there is a way to honor the past without surrendering to oblivion." As the two stood beneath the blooming trees, the palace around them seemed to hold its breath, caught between the weight of history and the flickering light of rebellion. The ink on their brushes was no longer just pigment, it was the beginning of a new story, fragile yet unyielding. Yet beyond the garden walls, shadows lengthened, and the cost of such defiance remained unknown. The palace corridors, usually alive with the soft murmurs of servants and the rustle of silk robes, seemed unnervingly silent that night. Wei Chen had just finished his latest sketch, a preliminary study for a portrait that sought to balance light and shadow, truth and illusion. His brush hovered uncertainly above the paper when Lan Ying appeared at the threshold of his chamber, her presence barely a whisper in the stillness. "Master Wei," she said softly, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "I have something you must see, but we must be cautious." Wei Chen's heart quickened. The young servant's rare visit was never without cause. He motioned her inside, closing the door gently behind them. Lan Ying produced a folded letter from the folds of her robe, its paper worn and edges frayed. "It was intercepted," she whispered, "meant for Minister Zhou's eyes only." With trembling fingers, Wei Chen unfolded the letter. The ink was faded but legible, the words heavy with conspiracy. It spoke of discontent within the court, a faction plotting to dethrone Emperor Zhou Yujian and seize power amid the chaos that gripped the empire. Names were hinted at but obscured, the veil of secrecy thick and suffocating. Wei Chen's mind reeled. The emperor, whose likeness he was destined to immortalize in brush strokes of oblivion, was not only a ruler fighting external enemies, but also endangered by those closest to him. The letter's existence meant that the palace walls concealed more than just whispers, they harbored deadly secrets. "What will you do?" Lan Ying's voice trembled, betraying her fear. Wei Chen stared at the letter, the weight of its contents pressing down upon his conscience. To reveal it could mean his own destruction. To stay silent was to become complicit. His art, once a sanctuary of expression, now felt like a cage forged by invisible chains. Days passed in a haze of anxiety. Minister Zhou's presence loomed like a storm cloud, his gaze ever watchful. Wei Chen sensed the enforcer's suspicion growing, the subtle tightening of control over palace affairs. The painter's brush grew heavier, each stroke a battle between duty and doubt. One evening, as Wei Chen labored in his studio under the dim glow of lanterns, footsteps approached. The door opened with deliberate slowness, and Minister Zhou entered, his eyes sharp and unyielding. "Painter," he said, voice low and cold, "your loyalty to the emperor is paramount. Remember that the portraits you create are not merely art, they are the legacy of the dynasty." Wei Chen nodded, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. "I understand, Minister Zhou." But beneath the surface, a silent rebellion stirred, a determination to infuse his work with the subtle truths hidden beneath layers of paint. That night, Wei Chen returned to the intercepted letter, reading it once more by candlelight. The fragile paper seemed to pulse with the urgency of its revelation. He knew the palace's fate, and his own hung precariously in the balance. The painter's journey had taken a perilous turn, entwining his brush with the shadows of conspiracy. As the empire teetered on the edge of collapse, Wei Chen grappled with a single, haunting question: could art preserve truth in a world bent on erasing it? The palace studio was shrouded in a muted glow, filtered through the delicate lattice windows that cast slender patterns over the silk canvas stretched tight before Wei Chen. The air was heavy with the scent of ink and drying pigments, a familiar comfort that now mingled uneasily with the weight of the task at hand. Emperor Zhu Yujian sat quietly, regal in his crimson robes embroidered with golden dragons, a figure carved from imperial tradition and unyielding authority. Yet beneath the surface of his composed demeanor, Wei Chen discerned a flicker of something fragile, an invisible tremor that betrayed the burdens hidden behind the emperor's inscrutable gaze. Wei Chen's brush hovered above the canvas, poised between duty and conscience. Each stroke was a measured act of creation and concealment. The emperor's portrait was not merely a likeness. It was a crafted illusion, designed to immortalize a sovereign while erasing the flawed man beneath the crown. Yet, as the images formed beneath Wei Chen's skilled hand, subtle truths began to seep through the layers of paint. The delicate shadows beneath the emperor's eyes deepened, suggesting sleepless nights haunted by rebellion and fear. A faint furrow crept across the brow, betraying the weight of impermanence that the emperor so desperately sought to hide. Minister Zhao stood silently near the doorway, his gaze sharp and unyielding. The political enforcer embodied the iron will of the court, a sentinel against any deviation from the imperial decree. His presence was a constant reminder of the peril inherent in Wei Chen's work, a silent threat shadowing every brushstroke. Yet the painter's heart beat with a quiet defiance, the need to capture the emperor's true face, however fleeting, growing stronger with each passing moment. "Your Majesty," Wei Chen murmured softly, breaking the heavy silence, "may I observe you more closely, to capture the spirit beyond the robe and crown?" The emperor inclined his head with a measured grace, his eyes reflecting a depth of sorrow that no courtier dared voice. "Very well, Wei Chen. But remember, the image you create must serve the dynasty, not your own conscience." Wei Chen's gaze lingered on the emperor's hands resting lightly on his lap, the veins prominent beneath the pale skin, the slight tremor betraying the fragility of a man clinging to a vanishing legacy. He dipped his brush in ink, then gently traced a line of shadow beneath the eye, a subtle curve of worry in the mouth's corners. Each mark was a silent testament to vulnerability, an unspoken rebellion against the erasure demanded by the throne. The painter's mind swirled with conflicting emotions, loyalty and doubt, reverence and fear. To reveal the emperor's humanity was to risk everything. Yet to paint only the immortal ideal was to betray truth itself. The studio seemed to close in around Wei Chen, the walls bearing witness to the dangerous dance of memory and oblivion unfolding on the canvas. A sudden breeze stirred the papers on the worktable, scattering sketches and letters like whispers from the past. Wei Chen caught a glimpse of a folded note, its ink blurred and cryptic, a reminder of the palace's simmering unrest and the fragile threads holding the empire together. The weight of his task pressed heavier than ever. Minister Zhu's sharp voice broke through the painter's reverie. "Enough hesitation, Wei Chen. The emperor's image must be flawless. No hint of weakness." His eyes flicked to the canvas with suspicion. "Do not forget the consequences of disobedience." Wei Chen met the enforcer's gaze steadily, a quiet resolve hardening within him. Flawless, yes, but true. The words hung in the air like a fragile promise, a line drawn between survival and sacrifice. As dusk settled over the palace, the portrait took shape, a haunting blend of grandeur and fragility, illusion and truth. Wei Chen's brush had captured the vanishing emperor's true face, a visage that would forever walk the shadowed halls of memory and oblivion. Yet beneath the surface of this masterpiece lay the seeds of conflict, the fragile nature of power and legacy intertwined with the painter's own fate. Wei Chen knew that with each subtle truth he painted, the walls of the palace grew ever more perilous, the silence around him thickening with unspoken threats. The soft glow of paper lanterns cast wavering shadows against the lacquered walls of the secluded chamber. A faint scent of jasmine lingered in the air, mingling with the subtle musk of aged silk and polished wood. Madame Lion stood by the window, her silver-streaked hair catching the light, shimmering like a river of moonlight flowing down her back. Her dark eyes, sharp and penetrating, scanned the courtyard below, yet her thoughts were miles away, tangled in the threads of a secret she dared not voice. Across the room, Minister Zhou's imposing figure filled the space with quiet authority. His high-rank robes rustled softly as he approached, the clack of his boots muted by the thick embroidered carpet. His sharp features were drawn tight with conflict, eyes flickering with a mixture of desire and dread. The weight of his political duty pressed heavily upon his broad shoulders, but in this stolen moment, he was simply a man caught between love and loyalty. "The walls have ears, Madame Lion," he whispered, voice low but urgent. "Our bond is a risk that could ruin us both." She turned, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Yet, Minister Zhao, is not the heart's rebellion as potent as any sword? We serve the dynasty, yes, but at what cost to our souls?" Their words hung in the air, laden with unspoken fears and hopes. Outside, the palace remained a fortress of silence, but within these walls, a fragile truth blossomed beneath the heavy shroud of secrecy. Unbeknownst to them, Wei Chen lingered in the shadows beyond a carved screen, his breath held tight. The painter's keen eyes took in every subtle glance, every tremor of the hand, every falter in the minister's voice. This was no mere political alliance. It was a delicate dance of vulnerability and defiance, a secret that threatened to unravel the very fabric of the court. Wei Chen's heart ached with a melancholy born of understanding. Here were two souls caught in the same impossible bind as himself, trapped by duty, yet yearning for something more. The painter's brush had long wrestled with the paradox of immortalizing a man while erasing his true self. Now he saw that the palace's power was not just built on decrees and portraits, but on silences held and sacrifices made in the shadows. Madame Lion stepped closer to Minister Zhao, reaching out to graze his hand with a delicate touch, a fleeting promise in the dim light. "If we are to survive, we must be cautious, yet I cannot deny the fire that still burns within me." The minister's gaze softened, the stern mask slipping for a moment. "Then we shall guard that fire in secret, as the dynasty guards its fragile peace. But be warned, should our truth be discovered, the consequences will be dire." A silence settled between them, heavy with the weight of unspoken fears and the bittersweet taste of forbidden affection. Wei Chen withdrew silently, the image of their fragile connection seared into his memory. Later that night, the palace corridors echoed with the distant footsteps of Minister Zhao as he slipped away into the darkness, leaving Madame Lion alone with her thoughts. She stood by the window, the cool night air brushing against her skin, her expression a blend of sorrow and steely resolve. The secret they shared was a fragile thread woven into the tapestry of palace intrigues, a thread that, if pulled, might unravel not only their lives but the delicate balance of power itself. For Wei Chen, this revelation deepened the shadows within his own heart. The painter who sought to capture truth through illusion now bore witness to the human frailty beneath the grandeur of the throne. In the quiet of the night, he wondered how many other secrets lay hidden beneath the lacquered surfaces of the empire. As the moon climbed higher, Wei Chen returned to his studio, his brush poised but hesitant. The faces he painted carried not only the weight of history, but the silent sorrows of those who lived beneath its gaze. Tonight, the portraits seemed to whisper of love and loss, of loyalty torn between duty and desire. The court's delicate equilibrium teetered on the edge. And Wei Chen knew that the unveiling of his next masterpiece would not just immortalize an emperor, but reveal the fragile human stories that power sought to erase. His hand trembled slightly as he began to sketch anew, each stroke a quiet rebellion, each shadow a secret waiting to be told. and as the first light of dawn touched the palace rooftops, the painter's heart was heavier with the knowledge that in this forbidden love, as in his art, truth and illusion danced an eternal waltz, fragile as a whispered promise in the night. The air in the palace had shifted, an almost tangible weight pressing down on every corridor and chamber. Wei Chen sensed it in the hurried footsteps that echoed faintly behind closed doors, in the furtive glances exchanged between officials, and in the restless murmurs that floated through the marble halls like a brewing storm. It was a fragile peace, a brittle calm that threatened to shatter at any moment. Wei Chen sat before his easel in the secluded chamber assigned to him, the half-finished portrait of Emperor Zhu Yujian staring back at him with an unsettling stillness. The emperor's painted eyes seemed to flicker with a secret life, a mixture of regal pride and concealed fear. The brush in Wei Chen's hand trembled, slightly not from weakness, but from the weight of what he was about to capture. Jin Hoa, his young apprentice, lingered nearby, restless energy barely contained within his slender frame. Master Jin Ho began, his voice low but edged with urgency. Must art always serve the emperor's will? Can't it reveal something more, something true? Wei Chen turned to him, meeting the bright gaze of the boy whose fingers were stained with ink and rebellion. Art is a language, Wei Chen replied cautiously, but it is also a weapon, a shield. It can protect or expose. Jin Hua's eyes sparkled with defiance. Then why must we hide the truth? Before Wei Chen could answer, the heavy wooden door creaked, and Madame Lion entered, her silver-streaked hair catching the flicker of candlelight. Her presence commanded silence, and even Jin Hoa fell quiet under her piercing gaze. The emperor's reign grows more precarious, Madame Lion said, her voice a soft but firm echo in the chamber. Whispers of rebellion stir among the ministers and generals. The fragile threads holding this dynasty together are unraveling, and your paintings, Wei Chen, carry more weight than you realize. Wei Chen nodded, the burden of her words sinking deep. I feel it too. The court is fracturing. Madame Lion's eyes softened for a moment as she glanced toward the window where the palace gardens lay shrouded in moonlight. There are forces at play that seek to rewrite history, to erase not just the emperor but all who stand with him. Your art must walk a dangerous path between truth and illusion, loyalty and resistance. The painter's mind raced. Every brushstroke, every hidden symbol embedded in his work was now a political act, a silent rebellion or a tool of oppression. He realized that the murals and portraits were no longer mere images. They were battlegrounds for memory and power. Later that evening, Wei Chen found himself wandering the palace corridors, the muted echoes of whispered conversations guiding him. He paused outside a secluded garden where shadows danced beneath the moonlight. There, hidden among the flowering jasmine, he glimpsed Madame Lion speaking softly with Minister Xiao, the emperor's stern and unforgiving enforcer. Their voices were hushed, laden with a mixture of loyalty and desire, a secret romance that complicated the already tangled web of palace intrigue. Wei Chen watched from the shadows, the weight of secrets pressing heavily on his chest. The fragile alliances and hidden affections within these walls were as delicate and dangerous as the silken threads that adorned the emperor's robes. Back in his chamber, Wei Chen pondered the precariousness of his position. The emperor's image had to be flawless, eternal, yet the man himself was vulnerable, haunted by fear and the relentless march of time. To immortalize the emperor was to participate in his erasure to paint power while concealing humanity. Minister Xiao's presence loomed ever larger in the palace, his watchful eyes reminding Wei Chen of the consequences of defiance. The political tides were rising, and with them the risks of his forbidden creations. As the days passed, Wei Chen's paintings grew ever more complex, layered with subtle symbols of resistance and truth hidden beneath the veneer of imperial grandeur. Jin Hoa's youthful idealism fueled his courage, pushing him to challenge the boundaries of obedience and artistic expression. Yet with every stroke, the danger tightened around them. Wei Chen's heart pounded with anxious anticipation, knowing that the fractures within the court were spreading like cracks in porcelain, beautiful but fragile and ready to shatter. The studio was cloaked in twilight when Wei Chen settled before the canvases, his brush poised between colors that seemed to bleed away like fading memories. The heavy silence of the palace pressed in on him, broken only by the faint rustle of silk robes and the distant murmur of guards in the hallways. His hand trembled slightly, a hesitation that had become frequent in recent days. He dipped the brush into muted ink, the liquid pooling dark and thick before he lifted it to the canvas. The emperor's face emerged beneath his strokes, not as the vibrant, commanding figure the court desired, but as a spectral echo. The eyes, once fierce and commanding, now blurred into shadows. The lines that should have conveyed strength instead dissolved into mist, the features softening until the visage appeared hollow, a ghost trapped between presence and absence. Wei Chen's heart tightened at the sight. With each stroke, he was not immortalizing the emperor, he was erasing him. "Why do you hesitate?" The voice cut through the quiet, sharp and uncompromising. Minister Zhao stood in the doorway, his dark robes rustling like a storm cloud about to break. His eyes bore into Wei Chen's, carrying the weight of imperial command, unapologetic and unyielding. Wei Chen lowered his brush, swallowing the turmoil that churned within. "My work will honor the emperor," he said carefully, though the words tasted bitter. "It must reflect his glory." Minister Zhao stepped forward, the aura of authority a palpable force in the room. "Glory is not found in doubt or half measures. Complete the task as decreed. The portraits are not for your conscience, but for the empire's legacy." The painter's gaze flickered back to the canvas, to the fading monarch whose humanity was dissolving beneath his brush. The weight of erasure was no longer just the emperor's, it was his own. Each stroke that obliterated the imperfections of the sovereign also chipped away at the integrity of the artist himself. Later that night, Wei Chen sat alone in the quiet corridor outside the forbidden mural chambers, the air thick with the scent of aged wood and incense. A soft step approached, and Madame Lion's familiar silhouette emerged from the shadows. Her silver-streaked hair caught the faint lantern light, her dark eyes sharp and knowing. "You carry a heavy burden," she said gently, sitting beside him on the polished stone bench. He sighed, the weight of his conflicted soul pressing down. "How can I paint what must be forgotten? How do I preserve truth when my brush must extinguish it?" Madame Lion's gaze was steady, unwavering. "In this palace, truth is a fragile thing, often sacrificed for survival. But even in silence, there are whispers. Your art can speak beyond the walls if you dare to listen." Her words stirred something within Wei Chen, a flicker of courage amid despair. Days passed, and in the secluded corners of the palace, Jin Ho's youthful energy offered a stark contrast. The apprentice's ink-stained fingers danced across scraps of parchment, sketches alive with raw emotion and unfiltered truth. Watching him, Wei Chen felt a spark rekindled, a reminder of why he had chosen this path of creation despite its dangers. Master Jinhua said one afternoon, eyes bright with defiance, "Why must we erase what makes us human? Is there no beauty in imperfection?" Wei Chen's heart clenched. The world we live in demands illusions, but the truth, your truth, may yet survive in the spaces we dare to leave unpainted. As the final portraits took shape, a haunting duality settled over Wei Chen's work, images that captured both the emperor's grandeur and his vanishing essence. The brush strokes were both tribute and erasure, memory and oblivion intertwined. With each passing day, Wei Chen felt his own identity blur, swallowed by the very shadows he summoned on canvas. The palace halls whispered of change, and Wei Chen knew that the price of silence was higher than he had ever imagined. Yet in the depths of melancholy, a fragile hope endured, a hope born from the delicate balance between creation and destruction, between what is remembered and what is lost. And as the moon rose high over the forbidden city, Wei Chen's brush trembled once more, poised to paint the next stroke in the delicate dance between art and mortality. The quiet of the late afternoon in the palace was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the faintest whisper or the softest footfall. Wei Chen sat alone in his chamber, the pale light from the lattice window casting delicate shadows across his half-finished portrait. The emperor's visage stared back at him, noble, serene, but hollow beneath the brushwork. The weight of his task bore down on him more heavily than ever. A gentle knock at the door drew Wei Chen's attention. He turned, and there stood Lan Ying, the palace servant whose presence had become an unexpected source of comfort. Her dark eyes flickered with a quiet urgency, her expression carefully guarded. Without a word, she stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. Lan Ying approached the table where Wei Chen's brushes lay, her fingers brushing against the worn wood as she reached into the folds of her simple robe. From within she produced a small, folded note, which she slid into the brush holder with a barely perceptible motion. "For your eyes only," she whispered, her voice low and steady. Wei Chen's fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the parchment. The ink was faded, but the words were clear, whispers of rebellion, murmurs of discontent among the ministers, and a growing undercurrent of fear within the palace walls. The note spoke of plots brewing in the shadows, plans to undermine the emperor's fragile hold on power. His heart pounded as he folded the note back, meeting Lan Ying's gaze. "How do you know all this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then replied, "I serve many masters, and my ears hear what others miss. The palace is a web, and sometimes even the smallest thread carries a secret. I cannot say more, but you must be careful." The painter nodded slowly, a mixture of gratitude and unease washing over him. Lan Ying's quiet bravery was a lifeline in the midst of encroaching darkness. In the days that followed, she became a subtle ally delivering fragments of overheard conversations, warning of increased surveillance, and offering moments of calm in an otherwise suffocating world. Their alliance was unspoken but profound. In fleeting glances and hushed exchanges, they shared a recognition of the peril that surrounded them. Wei Chen found himself drawing strength from her presence, even as the shadows lengthened within his own soul. One evening, as the palace settled into a heavy silence, Lan Ying moved silently through the corridors, her footsteps muffled by thick carpets. She gathered whispers from servants and guards alike, fragments of fear and defiance that painted a picture of a court on the brink. Returning to Wei Chen, she conveyed these delicate truths with a careful balance of hope and warning. The painter listened intently, the faces behind the whispers weaving into his mind like brushstrokes on a canvas, each one a story of loyalty, betrayal, and survival. His own portrait of the emperor seemed to shift under his gaze, the painted eyes reflecting a man caught between worlds. As dusk filtered through the lattice window, Wei Chen sat alone once more, the fading light mirroring the quiet desperation within. The knowledge Lan Ying had shared was both a gift and a burden, illuminating dangers he could no longer ignore. He dipped his brush into the inkwell, the bristles trembling slightly as he contemplated the path ahead. In the stillness, a single thought echoed: how much truth could survive the erasure, and at what cost to the painter's own soul. Wei Chen's journey through shadows and secrets was far from over, but with Lan Ying's whisper as his guide, he felt a fragile hope flicker amid the encroaching night. The palace held many secrets, and he was determined to paint them one brushstroke at a time. In the quiet sanctuary of the hidden mural chamber, shadows lengthened as the day waned, and Wei Chen stood before his latest canvas, brush poised delicately between thumb and forefinger. The air was thick with the scent of ink and drying pigments, mingling with the faint scent of incense from the outer palace halls. His eyes, deep and contemplative, traced the emerging figure of Emperor Zhu Yujian, a visage both regal and ephemeral, painted not only with colors, but with the weight of a crumbling dynasty. The strokes were no longer mere reproduction. They breathed life into an illusion, a dance between memory and oblivion. Wei Chen's brush swept across the canvas, blurring the emperor's sharp features into swirling mists that curled like smoke, dissipating yet never fully vanishing. Around the figure, faint, almost imperceptible tendrils of shadow intertwined with symbols drawn from ancient scrolls: the phoenix, the lotus, the broken sword, each laden with meaning, each a secret message whispered in pigment. Jin Hoa, his young apprentice, sat nearby, watching with intense eyes that flickered with both admiration and quiet rebellion. His slender fingers, stained with ink from his own tentative sketches, tapped softly against the wooden floor. "Master," he whispered, voice barely above the rustling silk of their robes, "why do you paint the emperor with shadows and mist? Does the court not desire a clear image, a symbol of strength?" Wei Chen's gaze did not waver from the canvas. "A clear image is but a mask, Jin Hoa. What we see is never the whole truth. The emperor's reign is not merely strength. It is frailty and fear woven beneath the silk robes. My brush must tell both stories, the seen and the hidden." The apprentice nodded slowly, absorbing the paradox. This art was no longer a simple act of creation, but a subtle rebellion, a coded conversation with the future. Yet, with each secret symbol imbued in the paintings, the risk grew. Minister Zhou's watchful eyes and the palace's unforgiving order loomed ever larger. A sudden, soft creak announced the arrival of Madame Lion. Her presence was as commanding as ever, her silver-streaked hair shimmering under the lantern light, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. She approached the canvas, her fingers lightly tracing the edges of the painted mist. "You weave a dangerous spell with your brush, Wei Chen," she murmured, voice low and tinged with both warning and sorrow. "These illusions may preserve memory, but they also kindle shadows that could consume us all." Wei Chen met her gaze, the weight of his secret pressing heavily upon his chest. "Is it not the artist's burden to navigate such shadows, madam? To offer the truth hidden beneath the surface?" She sighed, a sound like the whisper of silk against stone. "Beware the cost of such truth. The palace does not forgive those who undermine the emperor's image." As she departed, the chamber seemed colder, the flickering lantern light casting long, wavering shadows that danced upon the walls like restless spirits. Wei Chen turned back to his work, the image of the emperor now complete, a haunting blend of majesty and vulnerability. The imperial mask fractured by the subtle illusions woven deep within the paint. Later, as the moon rose high over the palace, a fleeting figure passed by the chamber's lattice window: Emperor Zhu Yujian himself, drawn silently to witness his likeness. His eyes, inscrutable and deep, lingered on the portrait. For a moment the veneer of imperial resolve cracked, revealing a flicker of fear and loneliness beneath. The emperor's gaze met the painted shadows, as if recognizing the fragile truth that Wei Chen dared to capture. Yet, the political unrest tightening around the palace walls was a silent storm, and this fragile moment of vulnerability was destined to be swallowed by the tides of history. Wei Chen stepped back, heart heavy yet resolute. His art had become a battleground between memory and oblivion, truth and illusion, loyalty and rebellion. Every stroke was a risk, every hidden symbol a silent plea for remembrance amid the erasure. And as the night deepened, the painter knew the lines between reality and dream, between the emperor's legacy and his own fate, were growing ever more blurred. The illusions deepened, and with them, the fragile hope that art might one day outlast the shadows of empire. But the question remained, hanging like mist in the cold air. How far could he push these illusions before the palace's unforgiving gaze turned from suspicion to condemnation? The answer would come with the dawn, and with it, the next chapter in the haunting dance between creation and destruction. Wei Chen's brush hesitated at the edge of the canvas, ready to continue weaving the story that would define not only an emperor's legacy but the fragile soul of the artist who dared to paint the vanishing truth. The chamber was suffused with a heavy stillness, punctuated only by the faint crackling of incense burning low in its ornate holder. Wei Chen sat quietly before his easel, the soft whisper of his brush against the silk canvas, the sole sound breaking the hush. Outside, the palace bustled with its usual masked urgency, but here, in this hidden room, time seemed to slow, contracting into a tight knot of anticipation and dread. This was the moment he had dreaded since the emperor's decree, the final portrait session. His hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm mask he wore for the courtiers and guards beyond the chamber's heavy doors. The brush felt heavier than usual, weighted not by its own material, but by the impossible burden it carried, the task to immortalize a sovereign while erasing his true self. Wei Chen's eyes flicked to the delicate pigments arranged meticulously on the lacquered table, each color a possibility, each stroke a choice between truth and oblivion. A faint rustle at the threshold drew his attention. Madame Lion emerged from the shadows, her silver-streaked hair catching the muted candlelight. Her dark eyes held a depth of understanding and a quiet fire that belied her calm demeanor. "Wei Chen," she whispered, stepping closer, "this is your moment of reckoning. Remember what the murals have taught us: truth often hides in the spaces between brushstrokes." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Her words were both a warning and a balm. The forbidden murals she had shown him, those silent witnesses to history's erasures, had awakened something within him, a desire to resist the hollow perfection demanded by the court. The heavy doors creaked open. Emperor Zhu Yujian entered, his presence filling the chamber with an imposing gravity. Clad in imperial robes embroidered with dragons and phoenixes, he looked every bit the ruler the world expected him to be. Yet, as Wei Chen's eyes met the emperor's, he saw beyond the regal facade the flicker of vulnerability, the silent fear of an impermanent throne. "Wei Chen," the emperor's voice was steady but carried a wariness that spoke of sleepless nights and unspoken burdens. "Today, you will complete the image that the empire will remember." Wei Chen bowed deeply, setting his resolve. "Your Majesty, I shall honor your wishes." As the emperor settled onto the carved chair, Wei Chen began to paint. The initial strokes were precise, capturing the emperor's commanding posture and dignified countenance as required. But beneath the surface, his brush danced a secret dance, subtle shifts in color, a faint shadow beneath the eyes, the suggestion of a tear almost lost in the swirl of gold and crimson. Each stroke was a silent act of rebellion, a whispered truth hidden beneath layers of imperial grandeur. Wei Chen's heart pounded as he worked, aware that discovery would mean ruin not only for him, but perhaps for those who dared to whisper truths within these walls. Midway through the session, Minister Zhao entered without announcement, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. His presence was a stark reminder of the ever-watchful eyes enforcing the emperor's will. "Painter," Minister Zhao's voice cut through the silence, "ensure your work reflects the glory of the throne, not the frailty of the man." Wei Chen met his gaze steadily. "My brush serves the empire, minister." A slight nod from Zhao, but his eyes narrowed, suspicion simmering beneath his disciplined exterior. Madame Lion's presence at the door seemed to steady Wei Chen. Her silent encouragement was a lifeline amid the suffocating tension. As the final moments approached, Wei Chen applied the last stroke, a near-invisible tear glistening in the emperor's painted eye. It was a fragile concession to truth, a secret preserved in pigment and shadow. The emperor studied the portrait, his inscrutable gaze lingering on the subtle imperfection. A flicker of recognition passed through his eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the man beneath the myth. "It is done," Wei Chen said softly, stepping back. The chamber held its breath. Outside, the wheels of history turned relentlessly, but here, in this fragile space, a dangerous choice had been made, one that would ripple through the palace's gilded halls and into the uncertain future. Wei Chen's heart thundered with a mixture of fear and defiance. The path ahead was uncertain, and the weight of his secret would press upon him like the heavy silks of the emperor's robes. Yet, in that hidden tear, art had preserved a sliver of humanity, a beacon against the erasure that threatened to consume them all. The palace was awash in a restless energy as the day of the unveiling drew near. Flickering lanterns cast long shadows against the lacquered walls of the grand hall, their light mingling with the delicate scent of sandalwood and crushed jasmine that seemed to seep from the very stones. Courtiers, nobles, and ministers moved with practiced grace, their silks whispering secrets as they whispered to one another in low tones. Wei Chen stood apart, the weight of countless eyes pressing upon his slender shoulders. His hands, calloused and stained with ink, trembled ever so slightly as he adjusted the drape concealing his masterpiece, the final mural destined to immortalize the emperor's reign. This was no ordinary commission. It was a decree cloaked in paradox, a task that demanded the erasure of the man beneath the crown even as it sought to preserve his power for eternity. Wei Chen's brush had traced illusions and hidden meanings into the delicate folds of the emperor's painted robes. Symbols of resistance and memory veiled beneath layers of color and shadow. Tonight, these secrets would be revealed to a court hungry for reassurance, for the myth of an unyielding sovereign whose legacy would outlast the ravages of rebellion and time. Madame Lion moved through the crowded hall like a wraith, her silver-streaked hair catching the lantern light, her piercing dark eyes scanning each face with the vigilance of a guardian. She found Minister Zhou in a shadowed alcove, his stern countenance drawn tight with tension. Their whispered exchange was heavy with unspoken fears and loyalties, a fragile alliance forged amid the palace's shifting sands. The secret romance that bound them was a fragile thread in the tapestry of power, vulnerable to unraveling should the wrong eyes pry too deeply. At the fringes, Jinhua lingered, his bright eyes burning with a quiet fire. Ink-stained fingers clutched a scrap of paper where he hastily sketched the faces around him, the hopeful, the fearful, the calculating. His youthful rebellion simmered beneath the polished veneer of imperial order, a spark that threatened to ignite the carefully maintained illusions. Wei Chen caught his apprentice's gaze briefly, finding in it a reflection of his own hidden doubts and aspirations. With a measured breath, Wei Chen stepped forward, the heavy silk drape sliding away to reveal the mural in its full, haunting glory. The painting was a masterpiece of contradictions. The emperor's figure was majestic, regal, and yet beneath the surface, subtle imperfections whispered of vulnerability, of a man caught between the desire for eternal glory and the inescapable truth of mortality. The folds of his robes shimmered with delicate symbols, hidden memories, forgotten voices encoded in brushstrokes that only the most discerning eyes might uncover. The hall fell silent, the weight of expectation pressing upon every soul present. Eyes flicked between the painted emperor and the living one who stood nearby, regal and imposing in his imperial robes, his inscrutable gaze betraying nothing yet suggesting depths of fear and resolve. Wei Chen's heart pounded beneath his scholar's robes, the culmination of months of secret struggle hanging in the balance. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, some admiring the painter's artistry, others unsettled by the subtle dissonances woven into the image. Minister Zhio's sharp gaze swept the assembly, his presence a reminder of the strict control wielded by the emperor's enforcers. The fragile peace within the palace was poised on a knife's edge, the unveiling not merely a celebration, but a crucible that would test alliances and reveal fractures long concealed. As the evening deepened, Wei Chen withdrew to a quiet corner, the noise of the court a distant murmur. His thoughts drifted to the countless lives erased by history's relentless tide, to the vanished emperors whose stories had been painted over in silence. The mural was both a monument and a rebellion, a testament to memory and oblivion intertwined. The cost of this truth was high, and Wei Chen knew that once revealed, there would be no turning back. The emperor approached, his steps measured, his eyes fixing on the mural with a mixture of pride and something darker, perhaps regret. Their gazes met briefly, a silent exchange passing between artist and sovereign, a recognition of the fragile humanity beneath the imperial parade. Wei Chen felt the weight of his choice settle upon him, the final brushstroke already drying on the canvas of fate. Outside the grand hall, the palace seemed to hold its breath, the winds whispering of change and the inevitable fall of empires. Wei Chen's masterpiece was no longer just a painting, it was a catalyst, a mirror reflecting the impermanence of power and the enduring struggle between truth and illusion. As the crowd began to disperse, murmurs of awe and unease blending into the night, Wei Chen's resolve hardened. The unveiling had set events in motion that would shape the fate of the dynasty, and perhaps the fate of his own soul. The fragile line between memory and oblivion had been crossed, and the painter was left to face the consequences of the story he had dared to tell. The night deepened, shadows lengthened, and the palace whispered secrets that no mural could fully contain. The vast chamber was cloaked in shadows, broken only by the flickering light of a single oil lamp perched precariously on a low wooden stand. Wei Chen stood before the monumental canvas that stretched across the far wall, his slender fingers trembling ever so slightly as they gripped his brush. The air was thick with the scent of dried ink and aged silk, a reminder of the countless stories that had been woven into the palace walls, stories both told and deliberately forgotten. His eyes traced the delicate brushstrokes that formed the emperor's visage, a flawless image of majesty and strength, yet beneath the surface. Wei Chen knew the truth he dared not speak. The emperor was more than an immortal figure. He was a man bound by fear, insecurity, and the relentless demands of a crumbling dynasty. Each stroke of Wei Chen's brush was an act of both creation and erasure, a paradox that gnawed at his soul. The painter's thoughts drifted unbidden to the faces of those lost to history, the nameless courtiers, the whispered lovers, the rebels crushed beneath the weight of imperial decree. Their memories flickered like fragile candle flames, vulnerable to the winds of oblivion. Wei Chen's heart ached with the knowledge that his art, meant to preserve, was instead silencing these voices forever. A soft rustle disturbed the heavy silence. Wei Chen turned to find Lan Ying standing just inside the chamber's entrance, her delicate frame silhouetted against the dim corridor beyond. Her dark eyes held a quiet resolve, and in her outstretched hand was a small, folded parchment. "For you," she murmured, voice barely above a whisper. A reminder that not all is lost. He took the paper gingerly, the rough texture contrasting with the smooth paint beneath his fingertips. As he unfolded the note, his eyes caught sight of a hastily sketched symbol, a lotus blooming amidst shadow, a sign of hope and resistance known only to a few. Lan Ying's presence was a lifeline amidst the suffocating weight of the palace's secrets. Her subtle support breathed new life into his wary spirit, reminding him that even in silence, there could be defiance. But before Wei Chen could voice his gratitude, a deep voice echoed from the doorway. Turning, he saw Emperor Zhu Yujian's imposing figure framed by the ornate entrance. The sovereign's regal robes shimmered softly in the lamplight, yet his eyes betrayed a profound wariness. "The mural must be finished," the emperor said, his tone both commanding and fragile. "Our legacy depends on it." Wei Chen bowed his head, feeling the crushing gravity of those words. The final strokes loomed before him, a testament not only to the emperor's reign, but to the erasure of a man's true self. The painter's world narrowed to the space between brush and canvas, truth and illusion. As his brush touched the surface, Wei Chen's mind flickered to a hidden corner of the mural where he had embedded a subtle mark, a whisper of resistance woven into the tapestry of obedience. It was a faint detail, perhaps invisible to all but the most discerning eye, yet it bore the weight of unspoken truths. He paused, inhaling the cool air that smelled faintly of ink and dust. The chamber seemed to hold its breath with him, suspended between memory and oblivion. In that moment, Wei Chen understood the price of his silence, a soul slowly fading alongside the emperor's vanishing legacy, a truth buried beneath layers of paint and fear. Yet within that sacrifice, there remained a fragile spark, a brushstroke of memory defying erasure. Outside, the palace whispered on, its secrets folded tightly within forbidden murals, waiting for the day when their stories might be told anew. Wei Chen lifted his brush once more, ready to finish what he had begun, knowing that the true cost of his art was yet to be revealed. The flickering shadows of the chamber played tricks on Wei Chen's tired eyes as he labored late into the night. Every stroke felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the invisible burden of countless forgotten lives. The faces he painted were flawless, perfect in their imperial countenance, but he knew each portrait was an illusion, a carefully crafted mask to hide the fragile truth beneath. Memories of his childhood, of his father's teachings, whispered to him in the silence. His father, a master painter who had once told him, "Art is the voice of the soul, the keeper of truth," seemed a distant echo now. How far he had come from that ideal in these shadowed halls where truth was a luxury that could cost a life. Lanying's soft footsteps startled him from his reverie. She approached quietly, her presence a balm to his restless conscience. When she pressed the folded parchment into his hands, Wei Chen felt a flicker of something he had not felt in many months' hope. The lotus symbol was a secret among those who dared to dream of a better future, a future where art could speak freely and history would not be rewritten by fear. It was a dangerous message, one that could bring ruin if discovered, yet it was a lifeline. Wei Chen's heart quickened, but he masked his emotion beneath a calm exterior. Loyalty to the emperor demanded obedience, yet his soul yearned for the truth to live on. The tension twisted inside him like a tightly wound scroll. Suddenly, the heavy door creaked open, and the emperor entered, his presence filling the chamber with an oppressive gravity. Zhu Yujian's inscrutable gaze met Wei Chen's, a silent reminder of the stakes at play. The mural must stand as an eternal testament, the emperor intoned, voice both stern and wary. No cracks in the facade. Wei Chen bowed deeply, feeling the weight of imperial expectation settle on his shoulders. Yet beneath that weight stirred a quiet rebellion, a determination to let the hidden message survive beyond the brush's final stroke. As the night deepened, Wei Chen worked with painstaking care, blending truth and illusion into a tapestry that would both preserve and erase. Each stroke was a delicate balance, a dance on the edge of memory and oblivion. When the first light of dawn crept through the narrow windows, the mural stood complete, a masterpiece of haunting beauty and silent defiance. Wei Chen stepped back, eyes lingering on the faint lotus hidden among the imperial grandeur. The price of silence was high, but within it lay the fragile hope that memory might yet endure. The soft glow of dawn barely penetrated the thick latticework windows of the painter's chamber, casting elongated shadows over the scattered brushes and inkstones. Wei Chen sat silently before his easel, the muted colors of his latest work blurring at the edges of his weary eyes. Outside, the palace stirred, servants scurried, guards paced, and the distant murmur of officials echoed through the stone corridors. But within these walls a different tension simmered, one born not of politics or power, but of art, integrity, and the fragile thread that held truth and illusion in delicate balance. "Master Wei," a youthful voice whispered urgently, breaking the fragile quiet. Jinho slipped through the door, clutching a folded sheet of rice paper, his ink-stained fingers trembling ever so slightly. His bright eyes, usually sparkling with curiosity, now burned with determined fire. Wei Chen looked up, his expression softening. "What is it, Jinho?" Without hesitation, Jinho unfolded the paper, revealing a sketch raw in its defiance, an unfiltered glimpse of life beyond the emperor's idealized visage. The lines were jagged, the features more human, more vulnerable than any sanctioned portrait. It was a stark rebellion against the perfection demanded by the court, a silent scream etched in ink. This cannot be shown," Wei Chen murmured, torn between admiration and fear. The consequences would be severe. Jinho's gaze did not waver. "Then let it be known that we saw, that we remember. If the palace erases truth, then we must find ways to preserve it, even in whispers and shadows." The weight of his apprentice's courage settled heavily on Wei Chen's chest. For so long he had painted shadows behind silken screens, erasing and embellishing as commanded. Now, Jin Hoa's audacity challenged the very foundation of his existence within these walls. Their fragile moment shattered when the heavy footsteps of Minister Xiao thundered down the corridor. The political enforcer's dark robes seemed to swallow the light as he entered, his stern gaze sweeping the chamber like a hawk seeking prey. Jin Hoa Zhou's voice was cold, a blade sharpened by authority. "What is this?" Jin Ho met the minister's glare unflinchingly, holding up the sketch like a banner of defiance. "A truth, minister. One the court refuses to see." Xiao's lips thinned into a hard line. "Such insolence will not be tolerated. You would endanger us all with this rebellion." Wei Chen rose slowly, stepping between the two. "Minister Xiao, these are but exercises of the apprentice's hand, exploring the essence of our art. There is no threat here." Xiao's eyes flicked to Wei Chen, a silent threat passing between them. "Be wary, painter. Loyalty is not optional within these walls." The minister's departure left a heavy silence in his wake, broken only by Jin Ho's steady breathing. "I will not hide behind silence," the apprentice declared softly. "If truth must be veiled, then I will be the thread that unravels the tapestry." Wei Chen's heart stirred with a tumult of pride and dread. He had taught Jin Hoa the strokes that captured beauty and power, but never had he intended to nurture rebellion. As the day wore on, whispers of Jin Ho's defiance spread like wildfire through the palace corridors. Some expressed quiet admiration, others fearful condemnation. Wei Chen found himself at a crossroads, his duty to the emperor, the fragile safety of his position, and the growing fire within him kindled by Jin Ho's courage. That evening, as the painter prepared his brushes, Lan Ying approached with a subtle grace, her eyes glinting with unspoken understanding. She slipped a folded note into Wei Chen's hand with a gentle smile. "You are not alone," she whispered before vanishing into the shadows. The note bore a simple message: truth lives in the brush, even when the eyes cannot see. Wei Chen stared into the flickering candlelight, the weight of his choices pressing down like the heavy imperial robes that adorned the palace halls. Jin Ho's defiance was more than youthful rebellion. It was a beacon, fragile yet brilliant, illuminating the path he must now walk. The next days would test them all: the painter, the apprentice, and the empire's fragile legacy as the brush strokes of memory and oblivion danced ever closer to the edge of revelation and ruin. And as the palace walls seemed to close in, Wei Chen realized that art was no longer just a tool of preservation or erasure. It was a weapon, a refuge, and perhaps the last hope for truth in a world desperate to forget. The heavy wooden doors of the imperial study closed behind Wei Chen with a soft but final thud, the echo swallowed quickly by the vast silence of the forbidden chambers. He stood for a moment in the dimness, the faint scent of sandalwood incense curling in the air, mingling with the cold weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. Before him, seated behind a carved screen that filtered the flickering candlelight into fractured patterns, was Emperor Zhu Yujian, the man he had painted countless times, yet never truly known. The emperor's gaze was inscrutable as ever, but there was a crack in the facade tonight, a vulnerability that Wei Chen could not ignore. Zhu Yujian's hands, adorned with the delicate embroidery of imperial robes, rested lightly on the arm of his chair, but they trembled ever so slightly. The heavy crown atop his head seemed less a symbol of power and more a burden pressing him into shadow. "Wei Chen," the emperor began, his voice low and unexpectedly fragile, "you have seen the court's splendor and its whispers. You have witnessed the smiles of my ministers and the coldness behind their eyes. Tell me, what do you see when you look at me?" Wei Chen hesitated. The question was as much a challenge as a confession. He had spent months capturing the emperor's likeness: the proud chin, the sharp eyes that commanded armies and courtiers alike, but now, in this hushed moment, those images felt incomplete, hollow. He looked into those eyes again, searching for the man behind the throne. "I see a man who carries a weight far beyond what his shoulders should bear," Wei Chen answered carefully. "A man who balances the splintering empire on the edge of his patience, The emperor nodded slowly, a faint smile touching his lips, though it did not reach his eyes. They see only the crown, the robes, the scripts of power. But I fear the day when even my own likeness will be nothing but a shadow on a wall, forgotten, erased. Wei Chen's heart tightened. The emperor's voice bore the raw edge of loneliness, a stark contrast to the commanding figure so many revered. He thought of the murals hidden deep within the palace, where past emperors were painted with reverence, only to be whitewashed from memory when their reigns ended in disgrace or defeat. The paradox of immortality through art-preserving power, while erasing the man, was no longer abstract. It was flesh and blood before him. "You fear oblivion," Wei Chen said softly, "but your portrait, your legacy will endure." "Endure as what?" Zhu Yujian's gaze pierced through the dim light. An immortal ideal, a flawless emperor, or as a man, flawed and mortal, who faced rebellion and despair. The room seemed to shrink around them, the weight of unspoken truths pressing heavily in the air. Wei Chen's mind raced with the delicate balance he must strike in his paintings to honor the emperor's dignity, while revealing the fragile humanity beneath. Could his art carry such complexity without inviting ruin? A sudden noise interrupted the moment, a distant clatter of armor, the faint march of palace guards patrolling the corridors. The sounds were a stark reminder of the ever-present dangers lurking beyond these walls, of the conspiracies brewing in shadows, and of the isolation that cloaked the emperor like a second skin. Zhu Yujian's expression hardened for a moment, regaining the regal composure expected by all. Yet the vulnerability lingered beneath, a secret shared only in the quiet of this room. "Wei Chen," the emperor said, extending a small, intricately carved jade pendant from beneath his sleeve, "Take this. It is a token of hope, fragile and precious. Let it remind you that even power is fleeting, but memory can endure beyond the reach of time and fear." Wei Chen accepted the pendant reverently, feeling the cool smoothness of the jade against his palm. It was a symbol both of the emperor's trust and of the fragile legacy he sought to preserve. As he prepared to leave, Wei Chen looked once more at the man behind the throne, not the immortal ideal, but the fragile, haunted soul beneath the robes. The encounter left a profound impression, deepening the painter's understanding of the delicate dance between image and truth, between memory and oblivion. Outside the study, the corridors of the palace seemed colder and more foreboding than ever. Yet within Wei Chen burned a quiet resolve. His brush would carry not only the emperor's image, but the weight of his fears and hopes. In the impermanence of power, perhaps art could capture a fleeting truth, however fragile. As the candlelight dimmed behind the carved screen, Wei Chen stepped back into the shadows, the pendant warm against his chest, a silent promise of the delicate balance he must now maintain between loyalty and truth, between creation and erasure. The weight of the empire's fate rested not only in armies and decrees, but in the brushstrokes of a painter who dared to glimpse the man behind the mask. And as the night deepened, so too did the fragile hope that even in the vanishing of emperors, some memory might endure. The dim glow of lantern light flickered softly against the delicate rice paper stretched across the wooden easel. Young Wei Chen sat cross-legged on the polished floorboards, his breath shallow with anticipation as his father's brush danced across the sheet. The elder painter's hands moved with the fluid certainty of a river's current, each stroke a prayer, a whisper of life captured in ink. Wei Chen's eyes widened, drinking in the way the black lines swirled and converged into the elegant form of a crane, wings outstretched against the pale backdrop. The scent of ink mingled with the faint aroma of sandalwood incense, creating a sacred atmosphere that wove itself into Wei Chen's very bones. "Observe, son," his father murmured, voice calm but infused with intensity. "Painting is not merely copying what you see. It is the breath behind the form, the soul beneath the surface. Without that, you merely reproduce shadows." Wei Chen's small fingers twitched in his lap, atching to pick up the brush, to capture the elusive spirit his father summoned. but the weight of expectation pressed down on him. He was the son of Wei Yong, a painter revered across the province, a man whose art had adorned the halls of scholars and nobles alike. Every stroke he made carried the legacy of generations. That night, under the watchful eyes of his parents, Wei Chen attempted his first brushwork. The strokes were tentative and uneven, the crane's wings stiff and lifeless. His father's gaze was steady as he examined the work, and then he sighed softly. Discipline. Wei Chen, you must not let your heart wander too far, but neither must you cage it entirely. The brush is a bridge, you must learn to walk it with balance. The young boy's chest tightened. Was this a reprimand, a challenge? His father's words echoed in his mind, shaping the path he would follow with reluctant devotion. In the quiet moments after, his mother approached, her presence gentle as a spring breeze. She knelt beside him, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Do not be discouraged, my son," she whispered softly. "Your father's lessons are hard, but they are gifts. Within you lies a spark, let it grow, but remember to honor those who came before." Years passed, each one layered with countless hours of practice beneath his father's critical eye. Wei Chen learned to wield the brush with precision, to blend tradition and subtle expression. Yet beneath the surface, a restless spirit stirred, a yearning to explore beyond the confines of inherited technique, to infuse his art with truths unspoken. Now, standing alone in his chamber within the imperial palace, Wei Chen traced a charcoal sketch on thin silk, a fragment of an ancient landscape his father once painted. The lines, so familiar yet distant, seemed to pulse with memories of a simpler time, before the shadows of courtly intrigue had darkened his path. His fingers trembled slightly, the burden of expectation mingling with the growing weight of his own doubts. The faces of his parents, their teachings, their hopes, hovered at the edge of his mind like ghosts. Was he betraying them by bending his brush to serve the emperor's paradoxical decree? Or was he fulfilling a deeper legacy, one that demanded courage to confront both beauty and erasure? The chamber grew colder as the night deepened, but Wei Chen remained rooted in silent contemplation. His brush hovered over the silk, poised between honoring the past and shaping an uncertain future. The shadows of his youth whispered around him, urging him to remember who he was and who he must become. Outside, the faint murmur of the palace stirred, a reminder that the world beyond his memories awaited, fraught with peril and promise alike. As dawn approached, Wei Chen resolved to carry the echoes of his lineage forward. Even as he faced the vanishing emperors and the fragile edge of mortality that defined his art. The journey ahead was uncertain, but the shadows of the past had lent him strength, a quiet flame flickering against the encroaching darkness. And with that, Wei Chen dipped his brush into ink, beginning a new stroke that would bind memory and oblivion in a dance only he could lead. The chamber was hushed save for the delicate scratch of Wei Chen's brush against the rough stone wall. Lantern light flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to breathe life into the sprawling mural before him. This was no ordinary painting, it was a solemn testament, a fragile vessel of memory and meaning in a world determined to forget. Wei Chen's slender fingers trembled slightly as he dipped his brush into the ink, the deep black swirling like liquid night. He traced the folds of the emperor's silken robes, deliberately weaving into the fabric delicate, almost imperceptible symbols. Curling dragons whose tails twisted into the shape of broken chains, blossoms whose petals concealed the shapes of distant faces, and veins of ink that pulsed like hidden rivers beneath the surface. Each stroke was a secret spoken without words, a quiet rebellion masked beneath imperial grandeur. As he worked, Wei Chen recalled Madame Lion's words from the night before. She had come to him silently, her silver-streaked hair shimmering like the moonlight filtering through the screens. Her dark eyes held the weight of decades, of whispered secrets and lost glories. The murals, she had said softly, are more than images. They are the dynasty's heartbeat, its memory carved in shadow and light. But memory is fragile and history cruel. Your brush can speak truths where words fail." Those words lingered in his mind as he painted, urging him to embed every hidden message with care and precision. Wei Chen knew the peril should his subversion be uncovered. It would mean ruin not only for him, but for all those who dared to remember differently. Yet, the thought of surrendering the emperor's true face, the human beneath the crown, was a torment he could not abide. Nearby, Jinho sat cross-legged, his young eyes bright with a mixture of admiration and unease. His ink-stained fingers tapped nervously on the edge of his sketchbook as he watched Wei Chen's deliberate hand. "Master," he ventured cautiously, "why hide these symbols? Will they not be lost to all but a few?" Wei Chen smiled faintly, the lines of fatigue etched deep beneath his thoughtful eyes. "It is not for all to see, Jin He. Some truths are whispered only to those who listen closely, to those who dare to remember when silence is commanded. These symbols are a promise that even if the dynasty falls and the emperor's name fades, there will remain echoes of what once was." The apprentice's gaze flickered with newfound resolve. "Then we become keepers of memory, even in shadow." "Yes," Wei Chen murmured, "keepers in the dark." Hours passed in a solemn rhythm, the mural slowly taking form beneath his brush. The emperor's face was regal, yet beneath the royal veneer, Wei Chen painted veins of vulnerability, subtle shifts in expression, a hint of wariness in the eyes, a fleeting shadow of doubt. Around the figure, the intricate background blossomed into a labyrinth of symbols, phoenix feathers intertwined with faded scrolls, ghostly silhouettes of forgotten courtiers, and winding rivers that vanished into mist. Each element was chosen to tell a story beyond the official narrative, a tapestry woven with strands of loss and resistance. When the final stroke was laid, Wei Chen stepped back, his heart pounding in the cavernous chamber. The mural glowed softly in the lantern light, a grand image both breathtaking and haunting. The emperor stood immortalized, his power preserved, yet the hidden signs whispered truths only a discerning eye might perceive. The silence was broken only by the distant echo of footsteps in the palace corridors, a reminder that shadows watched, ever vigilant. Madame Lion's presence was suddenly felt beside him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You have done more than paint, Wei Chen. You have breathed life into memory itself, but beware, the palace does not forgive those who challenge its silence." Wei Chen met her gaze resolutely. "Then let them come. If my art can hold the past against oblivion, even in fragments, it is worth the risk." The chamber seemed to hold its breath as the two figures stood in the quiet glow, the mural a silent testament to the cost of truth and the fragility of legacy. Beyond the walls, the empire trembled on the edge of collapse, yet within this hidden sanctuary, a small flame of defiance flickered, fragile but unextinguished. As Wei Chen prepared to leave the chamber, Jin He approached, his youthful voice steady despite the weight of their secret. "Master, what will become of us, the artists, when the empire falls?" Wei Chen's eyes softened, reflecting both sorrow and hope. "We will become the keepers of stories, the guardians of memory. Our brushstrokes may fade, but the truths they hold will whisper on in the hearts of those who dare to remember." And with that, the painter of vanishing emperors stepped back into the shadows, carrying with him the silent legacy of a dynasty on the brink of oblivion. The mural's secret was sealed, a final act of rebellion painted in ink, shadow, and the enduring hope of memory. The chamber grew cold as the lantern flames flickered low, but Wei Chen's resolve burned bright. In this moment, beneath the weight of history's gaze, he understood that art was not merely creation, it was survival, resistance, and the fragile bond between past and future. The emperor's legacy would vanish from the pages of history, but through Wei Chen's hidden symbols, it would live on, a whisper against the silence, a brushstroke against oblivion. And as the first light of dawn touched the palace roofs, a new chapter of whispered truths quietly began. The heavy wooden doors to the mural chamber groaned shut behind Minister Zhou, his tall frame casting a shadow that loomed larger than the lantern light could contain. Wei Chen stood motionless before the latest portrait, brush poised but forgotten. The air thickened, the scent of aged ink and damp stone filling the silence between them. Xiao's eyes narrowed as he held up a torn piece of parchment, its edges frayed, but the careful calligraphy unmistakable. "Explain this," he demanded, voice low but edged with unmistakable menace. Wei Chen's throat tightened. The parchment contained fragments of code, hidden symbols, and subtle alterations woven into his paintings, messages only the keenest eyes might decipher. They were his silent rebellion, a whisper of truth beneath the emperor's grand illusion. Now exposed, they were a death sentence in disguise. Before Wei Chen could respond, the soft rustle of silk announced Madame Lion's arrival. Her silver-streaked hair shimmered in the flickering light, and her piercing dark eyes locked onto Minister Zhou with a mixture of urgency and quiet defiance. "Minister Zhao," she intoned, "consider the weight of your judgment. The dynasty's dignity rests not only on obedience but on understanding." Zhao's expression hardened. "Dignity. This is treason cloaked in artistry. The emperor's trust is betrayed." Madame Lion stepped closer to Wei Chen, her voice barely above a whisper. "There is more at stake than you perceive. These symbols carry the pain of forgotten voices and the hope of resistance." Wei Chen felt a tremor of hope amid despair. Yet the danger was far from over. Outside the chamber, Lanying moved swiftly and silently, her footsteps a ghostly rhythm through the palace corridors. She carried whispered warnings to Wei Chen, her eyes reflecting the urgency of their plight. "They know, Wei Chen," she murmured as she slipped into his studio. "You must act quickly." The painter's hands shook as he gathered sketches, each bearing the delicate traces of his concealed truths. Flames licked the edges of the papers, consuming secrets and sorrows alike. Yet destroying his work was a bitter surrender. "I cannot undo what has been painted," Wei Chen said, voice heavy with resignation. "But I will not let fear silence the story." Madame Lion's gaze met his, fierce and resolute. "Then we must prepare for what comes next. The palace is a web of shadows, and betrayal its cruelest thread." As the walls seemed to close in, the fragile equilibrium of the court shattered. Secrets spilled like ink on parchment, staining the halls with suspicion and dread. Wei Chen realized that his art, once a sanctuary, had become the battleground for truth and survival. Outside, the distant clang of armor and hurried footsteps echoed the rising storm. The painter's fate, intertwined with the emperor's vanishing legacy, teetered on the edge of oblivion. And in the quiet before the inevitable, Wei Chen's brush trembled with the weight of a world about to be rewritten. The chamber was cloaked in shadows, the soft flicker of candlelight casting trembling patterns across the ancient silk walls. Wei Chen stood silently at his easel, the smooth brush poised above the delicate porcelain palette, where colors lay in perfect but precarious balance. Outside, the palace hummed with restless whispers, but within this secluded sanctum, only the quiet scratch of brush against canvas and the faint scent of ink and candle smoke wove a fragile stillness. Emperor Zhu Yujian entered with measured steps, his imperial robes whispering like a silken tide. His gaze, inscrutable and heavy with the weight of a crumbling dynasty, fixed on Wei Chen as if searching for a sign of loyalty, of truth, or perhaps defiance. Wei Chen's heart thrummed with a mixture of fear and resolve. This was the moment he had dreaded and awaited in equal measure, the final portrait session, the culmination of a task that had slowly eroded the painter's soul. The emperor settled onto the carved wooden chair, his posture regal yet tinged with a wariness that no courtier dared to acknowledge openly. Wei Chen dipped his brush into the ink, the tip trembling ever so slightly. He began, each stroke deliberate, weaving a carefully crafted illusion that balanced the demands of imperial decree with the silent rebellion stirring within his heart. As the brush moved, Wei Chen's mind raced. This portrait would not merely immortalize the emperor's reign as a flawless ideal. It would also bear witness to the fragile humanity beneath. Subtle symbols, a shadow lingering beneath the brow, a flicker of vulnerability in the eyes. the faintest touch of impermanence etched into the folds of imperial robes, all concealed within the masterful strokes. The painting became a delicate dance between truth and illusion, a secret testament to the emperor's mortality and the painter's own torment. From the shadowed corner, Madame Lion observed silently, her silver-streaked hair catching the candlelight. Her dark eyes held a mixture of hope and sorrow, knowing the risks Wei Chen bore with each stroke. Nearby, Jin Ho watched with wide, ink-stained eyes, the apprentice's youthful defiance mirrored in the quiet strength of his mentor. The room's heavy silence was punctuated only by the soft rustle of silk and the painter's steady breathing. Minutes stretched into hours. Wei Chen's fingers grew numb, but did not falter. When the final brushstroke was laid, he leaned back, heart pounding as he unveiled the completed portrait. The emperor's image shimmered with an ethereal quality, regal and imposing, yet fractured by the hints of truth Wei Chen had dared to embed. The painting was a fragile equilibrium, a masterpiece that held both the power to preserve and the threat to expose. A heavy silence filled the chamber. Emperor Zhu Yujian's inscrutable gaze met Wei Chen's, and in that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. The emperor recognized the defiance hidden beneath the surface, the painter's unwillingness to surrender entirely to oblivion. But the consequences of this act were clear to all. Minister Zio's footsteps echoed down the corridor outside, a stark reminder that the palace's watchful eyes had not missed this subtle rebellion. Wei Chen's fate, intertwined irrevocably with the emperor's vanishing legacy, was sealed. As the chamber doors closed behind the emperor, Wei Chen remained standing before his creation, the weight of his choices pressing upon him. The portrait was more than an image, it was a battleground of memory and erasure, a final brushstroke in a story of power, art, and mortality. The fragile line between truth and illusion had been crossed, and the echoes of that crossing would ripple through the palace and beyond. Wei Chen's hands were stained with ink and burdened with secrets. The final portrait was complete, but the story was far from over. Somewhere between the fading colors and whispered histories, the painter's soul hung suspended, caught between the vanishing emperors he immortalized and the uncertain future he dared to envision. The chamber grew colder as the last candle guttered and dimmed. Outside, the palace awaited the unveiling, and with it, the reckoning that would come for all whose lives had been touched by the fragile art of memory and oblivion. And so, with a breath drawn deep and steady, Wei Chen prepared to face the consequences of his final creation, a masterpiece that would echo through the ages as both a tribute and a defiance. A whispered truth in the heart of disappearing power. The brushstrokes of destiny had been laid. Now, only time would tell what stories would survive the coming darkness. The morning air was thick with dust and the acrid scent of crumbling plaster. Wei Chen had arrived at the mural chamber before dawn, summoned once again by the cold authority of the court. The once vibrant walls, alive with centuries of hidden stories and whispered histories, were now scarred and broken. Palace guards moved methodically, their hammers and chisels striking stone and pigment, sending showers of debris to the floor. The sound echoed like a death knell through the vaulted room. Wei Chen's heart pounded fiercely, a tempest of emotions swirling within him. Each fragment that fell was a piece of the past ripped from existence, a fragment of truth erased in the name of imperial decree. He stood motionless, the weight of his own complicity pressing heavily upon his chest. The murals had been more than mere decoration. They were the silent witnesses to empires lost and rulers forgotten, their stories encoded in brushstrokes and colors that defied official narratives. Madame Lion emerged from the shadows, her silver-streaked hair catching the dim light. Her eyes, dark and piercing, scanned the destruction with a mixture of sorrow and restrained fury. She approached Minister Zhou, who stood nearby, his expression rigid and unyielding as he oversaw the operation. "This is a grave injustice," Madame Lion said softly but firmly, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. These murals are the soul of the dynasty, not just its surface. To destroy them is to sever the roots from the tree. Minister Zhao's gaze did not waver. The emperor's will is clear. The past must be cleansed to secure the future. No secrets, no dissent, only order and loyalty. Their exchange was electric, a clash of ideals beneath the crumbling remnants of history. Wei Chen watched, feeling the fissures in his own resolve deepen. The loyalty he had once held sacred now seemed like chains binding him to a hollow legacy. Amid the chaos, a soft hand brushed against his. Lan Ying, ever discreet and gentle, passed him a small, folded sketch. Wei Chen unfolded it carefully, revealing delicate brushstrokes that hid a message of hope and quiet resistance. It was a reminder that even in erasure, memory could find refuge in subtle defiance. The murals continued to fall, each piece a silent scream lost to the dust. Wei Chen's eyes fixed on the empty wall where once a vivid tableau had told of emperors and commoners, victories and betrayals. The silence that followed was oppressive, filled with the ghosts of untold stories. He felt as though a part of himself was being erased along with the emperor's legacy, the part that had believed in art's power to preserve truth against oblivion. Now, with the murals destroyed, that power felt fragile and fleeting. Yet within the hollowness, a seed of resolve took root. Wei Chen knew that the cost of silence was too great. His brush would no longer be a tool of erasure, but a weapon to capture memory, however hidden or fleeting. The path ahead was uncertain and dangerous, but the painter's soul stirred with the faintest pulse of rebellion. As the guards finished their grim task, and the last shard of mural clattered to the ground, Wei Chen cast one final look at the barren wall. The past was gone, but not all was lost. Somewhere between memory and oblivion, between brushstroke and shadow, he would find a way to defy erasure. The palace was silent now, but the story was far from over, and Wei Chen's journey, the dance between creation and destruction, was only just beginning. The night stretched its velvet cloak over the palace, swallowing the grandeur and the whispers of unrest that now simmered beneath its gilded roofs. Wei Chen stood in the shadowed recesses of the corridor, his breath shallow but steady, every sense alert to the faintest sound. The weight of the scrolls cradled in his arms pressed against his chest like the burden of 1,000 vanished emperors, their memories fragile threads woven into the fabric of his art. Lan Ying slipped beside him, her presence a quiet anchor amid the tempest. Her eyes, sharp and careful, scanned the path ahead, guiding him through the labyrinth of secret passages known only to a few. The scent of aged wood and ink filled the narrow halls, a bittersweet reminder of the palace's hidden histories now imperiled. "We must move swiftly," Lan Ying whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "The guards grow restless. Minister Zhao has tightened his watch since the unrest began." Wei Chen nodded, the resolve in his heart hardening. The final mural's destruction had shattered the fragile illusion of control. The emperor's legacy was unraveling, and with it, the delicate balance that had bound Wei Chen's soul to the palace for so long. Their footsteps echoed softly, blending with the distant murmur of alarmed voices and the clang of hastily drawn weapons. Every corner held the threat of discovery, every shadow a potential enemy. Yet beneath his fear, Wei Chen felt a stirring of something long dormant, a flicker of rebellion, a yearning for freedom beyond the painted veils of power. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness ahead, Minister Zhao. The enforcer's gaze was like a sharpened blade, cold and unyielding, as he stepped into the corridor's scant light. Wei Chen's heart thundered, but he forced his expression into serene composure. He bowed slightly, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Minister Zhao." The man's eyes narrowed, searching for any hint of defiance. "Wei Chen, your loyalty is noted," Zhao said, his tone heavy with unspoken threat. The emperor's orders must be fulfilled without question. A tremor passed through Wei Chen, but he met the gaze steadily. "My duty is to the art and through it, to the empire." A flicker of suspicion passed over Zhao's face before he nodded curtly and vanished back into the shadows, leaving Wei Chen and Lan Ying to resume their flight. At last, they reached the outer gates, now thrown open amid the chaos of rebellion spilling like wildfire through the city. The first light of dawn brushed the horizon with pale gold, casting long shadows over the courtyard where loyalists and insurgents clashed in desperate combat. Wei Chen paused, eyes searching the distant skyline. The palace behind him was no longer a sanctuary but a cage of silence and inertia. Clutching his brush and scrolls, he stepped beyond the threshold, the cool morning air filling his lungs with the scent of possibility and loss. In his mind echoed the soft, resolute voice of Madame Lion, whose wisdom had been a beacon through the darkness. Her words whispered like ink on fragile parchment. To preserve memory, one must sometimes become the shadow that guards it. As the city roared around him, Wei Chen understood that his journey was only beginning. Beyond the walls that sought to erase history, he would carry the fragile flame of truth and art, a testament to the vanished emperors and the price of immortality. The brushstrokes of memory and oblivion were now his to wield not as a servant of faded power, but as a guardian of stories longing to be remembered. And so, beneath the awakening sky, Wei Chen vanished into the uncertain dawn, the echoes of his footsteps a whispered promise that some legacies refused to fade. The evening sky was a muted wash of indigo and lavender as Wei Chen settled beneath the shelter of the ancient pine tree that stood sentinel at the edge of the village. The soft rustling of needles whispered secrets of time and endurance, yet his heart was heavy, burdened by memories that no longer belonged to the world he now inhabited. In his hands, he held a fragile portrait once vibrant, now faded and frayed at the edges, the image of Emperor Zhu Yujian. It was not the glorified sovereign depicted in the grand murals of the palace, but a delicate, almost ghostly likeness that bore the weight of all the emperor's hidden fears and failures. Wei Chen's fingers trembled slightly as he traced the contours of the brushstrokes. Each line was a fragment of a man erased from history, each shade a whisper of a life that once pulsed with flesh and breath. The paradox of his art, the power to preserve and to obliterate, had become a relentless shadow over his soul. How could a legacy born of such erasure be anything but a curse? Yet, in this exile, amid the quiet of the countryside, the painter sought to understand the fragile flicker of immortality his work had bestowed. Nearby, the gentle murmur of the river accompanied the soft scratch of brush on paper. Jin Hoa, ever vibrant even in these dark times, had set up a makeshift easel along the bank. His landscapes burst with color and light, a stark contrast to Wei Chen's somber reflections. The young apprentice looked up and smiled, his eyes bright with a mixture of curiosity and defiance. "Master," he said softly, "we still have the power to create worlds that speak truth, even if the courts have silenced ours." Wei Chen met the youthful gaze, a faint smile touching his lips. "Perhaps," he murmured, "but the weight of what we carry is not so easily cast aside. The past clings to us, even in the wind's song and the river's flow." As twilight gave way to dusk, a quiet knock came at the door of Wei Chen's humble dwelling. Lan Ying entered with the subtle grace that had earned her the trust of many in the palace and beyond. Her dark eyes held the sorrow of shared grief and the steadfastness of unwavering loyalty. In her hands she carried a worn scroll, the ink faded but the message undiminished by time. "News from the city," Lan Ying whispered, laying the scroll gently on the table. "The palace has fallen. The forbidden murals were destroyed, but some whispers live on. Not all truths can be erased." Wei Chen unrolled the scroll, his gaze lingering on the delicate calligraphy that spoke of resistance and remembrance. A flicker of resolve stirred within him, mingled with the deep ache of loss. "Then our work is not yet done," he said quietly. "In silence, memory endures." That night, by the flickering light of a lone candle, Wei Chen returned to his brushes. His hand moved with a tenderness and urgency born of years of conflict and concession. On the delicate silk before him, he wove strokes of memory and oblivion, images that pulsed with life and loss. Fragments of faces and fading shadows intertwined in a dance as old as time. Each brushstroke was a prayer, a lament, and a testament. Through his art, Wei Chen sought to reconcile the fragile nature of existence with the paradox of immortality his paintings had wrought. The weight of legacy pressed upon him, yet in this private masterpiece, he found a bittersweet piece of bridge between what is remembered and what is forgotten. Outside, the night deepened, and the world held its breath. Within the quiet room, the painter's soul shimmered briefly, caught in the delicate balance between creation and erasure. The story of vanished emperors and lost lives had not ended. It lived on in the brushstrokes of memory and oblivion. And so, with the dawn yet to come, Wei Chen's journey continued not as the obedient artist of the palace, but as a guardian of fragile truths, carrying the weight of legacy in every stroke of his brush. To be continued. The room was cloaked in silence, pierced only by the soft scratch of Wei Chen's brush against the delicate silk of the scroll. The faint scent of ink and aged paper mingled with the cool air, creating a reverent atmosphere that seemed to hold its breath alongside the painter. Wei Chen's slender fingers trembled slightly as he dipped his brush into the ebony ink, the fluid darkness pooling momentarily before he guided it onto the scroll with deliberate care. Each stroke was a whisper of memory, a fragile thread woven between fading emperors and the shadows of his own existence. This final work was unlike any other he had created within the palace walls. It was not a commissioned portrait meant to glorify or conceal. It was a private testament, a meditation on the weight of erasure and the fragile beauty of remembrance. As the brush moved, figures emerged, imperial silhouettes dissolving into mist. Crowned faces alight with fleeting emotion before fading into the vast emptiness of the scroll's silk. Wei Chen's eyes, deep and contemplative, traced the contours of his creation, each line a question, each shade a sigh. The faint rustle of footsteps stirred the stillness. Lan Ying entered quietly, her presence a balm to the painter's weary soul. She carried a cup of warm tea, the gentle clink of porcelain a soft counterpoint to the silence. Setting the cup nearby, she offered a small, reassuring smile without words. Wei Chen glanced up, gratitude flickering in his thoughtful eyes. In this quiet companionship, he found a tether to the world beyond his solitude, a reminder that even in the depths of loss, connection endured. The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows upon the scroll. The painted emperors seemed to breathe with a life of their own, their forms wavering like ghosts caught between realms. Wei Chen's brush continued its slow dance, layering hints of symbolism, hidden motifs of memory, resistance, and the inexorable passage of time. Each stroke was an act of defiance and acceptance, capturing the paradox that defined his journey, to create art that immortalizes while simultaneously erasing. As dawn's pale light crept through the lattice windows, Wei Chen stepped back, his gaze resting on the completed masterpiece. The scroll was a tapestry of loss and longing, a silent elegy to vanished rulers and forgotten legacies. Exhausted but resolute, the painter understood that this work was more than a painting. It was the culmination of his soul's reckoning with mortality, power, and the cost of silence. Lan Ying approached, her eyes reflecting the quiet dawn. No words were needed between them. The weight of what had been wrought hung in the air. Wei Chen carefully rolled the scroll, securing it as one might cradle a fragile memory. Outside the palace walls, the world awaited, uncertain, fragile, yet filled with the promise of renewal. In that moment, Wei Chen embraced the truth that art is both a vessel and a veil, capable of preserving a moment while allowing it to slip quietly into oblivion. His final brushstroke was not an end, but a beginning, an invitation for memory to live on, even as the emperors faded into the mists of history. With a steady breath, he turned away from the shadows of the past, stepping toward a future shaped by the delicate balance of creation and loss. The painter's journey had come full circle, leaving behind a legacy not of grandiose portraits, but of intimate truths rendered in ink and silence. and as the first light of morning bathed the palace in gentle gold, Wei Chen felt the fragile pulse of hope beneath the melancholy, a testament to the enduring power of art to touch the edges of eternity.